Chapter 2029, An Unfavorable Start. 4. Since then, the conflict between the Phoenix tribe and the Golden Eagle tribe had been endless. In the end, it developed into a conflict between the two tribes. In the end, the Divine Master came forward and resolved the conflict with a fair duel. However, the ancestor of the Golden Eagle tribe was a narrow-minded person. After returning to the tribe, he died a few days later due to a heart attack. Therefore, some members of the Golden Eagle tribe hated the Phoenix King. They didn't dare to cause trouble for the Phoenix clan on the surface, but they had definitely schemed against the Phoenix clan in secret. However, the anger of the Phoenix clan was suppressed by the magnanimous King Feng. Therefore, the two clans seemed to be at peace on the surface, but there had been an undercurrent in private. After he inherited the throne of the Golden Eagle tribe, he was young and impetuous. He had heard a lot of complaints about the Phoenix King from his tribe since he was a child, so he impulsively came to challenge the Phoenix King. As time went by, he naturally learned more about the Phoenix King's way of doing things. As he learned more about the Phoenix King, his hostility toward the Phoenix King slowly turned into admiration, and he became closer to the people of the Phoenix tribe. Under his leadership, the young members of the Golden Eagle tribe started to complain less and less about the Phoenix tribe. Some of them even became good friends with the Phoenix tribe. Originally, if this situation continued, it would be beneficial to the Golden Eagle tribe. However, some people could not bear to see the two tribes getting along, so they betrayed him, the king of the Golden Eagle tribe, and cooperated with Wu Ling to kill the Phoenix King and Lord Yu. Of course, the Golden Eagle tribe was not the only one responsible for this. Many other beast tribes were also involved. However, as the king of the Golden Eagle tribe, the shame of being betrayed had always followed him. Although he had finally taken back the throne of the Golden Eagle tribe and cleaned up the rebels, he had never been able to save the Phoenix King. He had also never been able to avenge Lord Yu, which was his biggest regret. He regarded the Phoenix King as his master's family, and Master Yu as his idol and someone he wanted to follow. So, he had to save and take revenge on both of them. But after so many years, he had not been able to get close to them. This fact had always made him depressed. Now, when he saw the guards by the Phoenix King's side, he felt extremely close to them. Even his eyes were slightly red. His eyes were hot and some unknown liquid began to flow in them. "You're not stupid." Seeing Ao Jie's reaction, Feng Zhan glanced at him and said calmly. "Of course I'm not stupid. I'm very smart." Upon hearing this, Ao Jie quickly retorted. The sadness he felt earlier also disappeared without a trace. "Hee hee. You really haven't changed at all." Seeing Ao Jie's familiar expression, Feng Zhan was overjoyed. In the past, they liked to tease this stupid little eagle when they had nothing to do. Every time they saw him stomping his feet in anger, they would be very happy. Then, they would throw him some phoenix fruits as a reward for pleasing them. At that time, this little eagle would be even more angry. However, it just so happened that it didn't have any phoenix fruit on hand right now. Otherwise, it would really want to throw it to him like before. Feng Zhan thought to himself with evil intentions. Fortunately, Ao Jie didn't know what Feng Zhan was thinking. Otherwise, he would have run as far away as he could. But now, Ao Jie was more friendly with Feng Zhan, so he ignored Feng Zhan's joke and asked him about their whereabouts all these years. When he found out that Feng Zhan and the rest of the Feng clan had been exiled to the lower realm for so many years and had almost lost their lives, all the guilt in his heart surged up. After a long while, he finally apologized. "I'm sorry, back then the Golden Eagle clan." However, before he could finish, Feng Zhan interrupted him. "What happened back then had nothing to do with you. There's also a traitor in the Phoenix clan. A great tribulation of the divine realm," Feng Zhan said with a worried face. Every time he thought about the Phoenix King and his people still suffering, his heart ached as if it was being cut by a knife. Then, he thought of Feng Zhan and changed the topic. "He's Feng Zhan, the youngest son of the Phoenix King. He was born in the lower realm." Feng Zhan. After hearing Feng Zhan's introduction, Ao Jia sized up Feng Zhan and couldn't help but pick him up. However, Feng Zhan rejected his hug. Damn it! Let me go. Other than my master, I won't allow anyone else to hug me. Feng Zhan roared in anger. Although Feng Zhan and the other clansmen wanted to hug him from time to time, he had always avoided them whenever he could. If he couldn't avoid them, he would let them hug him. But who the hell was this guy in front of him? What right did he have to hug her? Is this little fellow really the son of the Phoenix King? Why is your temper so bad? Looking at Feng Zhan, who was struggling in his arms, Ao Jia hugged him even tighter. However, his face was filled with suspicion. After all, in his heart, the Phoenix King was a gentle and elegant beast king, unlike this little thing who was like a barrel of explosives. I'm sure. Feng Zhan's face darkened when he heard Ao Jia's words. Oh. You must have spoiled it too much. Why don't you hand it over to me? I'll be responsible for raising it. Otherwise, if the Phoenix King finds out that his son has such a bad temper, he will be disappointed. Ao Jia suggested. Do I need you to meddle? Ao Jia's words made Feng Zhan clench his teeth in hatred. What kind of person was this? Was there anyone so familiar with him? Hugging it the moment he came up and even saying that he wanted to teach it, he really angered the phoenix to death. Seeing that Feng Zhan was about to vomit blood from Ao Jia's anger, Mei could only say, Grandpa Feng Zhan, you still haven't told us about Yes' condition. As she said this, the mice's forehead was filled with black lines. These people really knew how to go off topic. They had clearly gathered here for the matter of you, but in the end, it had become a family reunion. However, on account that they were old acquaintances, these little beasts did not disturb them. However, they had to make a sound now. They were really afraid that Feng Zhan and Ao Jia would fight. Yup. Feng Zhan scratched his head in embarrassment, then tried to come up with an excuse. Its eyes were burned by its consciousness. Although Shuai gave it some healing pills, the other party was too strong, so its injuries were quite serious. It has already injured its optic nerve, so it will take some time to recover. But it won't be blind forever, don't worry. In fact, there was one more thing that it didn't say. It would take a long time to completely recover. Fortunately, Shuai had given it the best healing pills. Otherwise, you would have no fate with the light. After hearing Feng Zhan's words, the little beasts finally relaxed. At this time, Yu slowly woke up, but it was all dark in front of him, which made him very uncomfortable. He struggled to get up, but accidentally fell off the bed. Be careful. Feng Zhan was the closest to it. When he saw this, he quickly flew out of Ao Jia's arms and caught the feather that almost fell to the ground. Then, he carefully placed it on the bed. Chapter 2030, An Unfavorable Start, 5. The other little beasts also surrounded you in fear, each of them asking about her well-being. Seeing this scene, Ao Jia smiled. It seemed that the little phoenix was not angry at everyone and these little beasts were so harmonious that it made people envious and jealous. Don't tell master about me. Feather's eyes searched around but could not find the focus. It was obviously speaking to Ao Jia. Are you sure you don't want to tell her? If she knew that you hid such a big thing from her, I think that little girl will be angry. I don't know if we, who know the truth, can withstand her anger. Ao Jia laughed when he heard Yes' words. However, as soon as he said that, the little beasts present could not help but tremble in their hearts. Their eyes were also wavering. When Ao Jia saw this, he knew that these little beasts were all conflicted in their hearts. As expected, Feng Zhan was the first to hesitate. Why don't I let master know? This matter can be kept a secret. Feng Zhan said after some thought. Master will feel guilty. You said softly. He didn't want his master to blame himself, so he didn't want his master to know. Who said I would feel guilty? I only feel heartache. All of a sudden, Leng Ruox's voice rang in the ears of the little beasts. Instantly, the scene turned into a mess. When the little beasts heard their master's voice, they all subconsciously looked for a place to hide. Seeing them like this, Aojia laughed in his heart. Actually, he had long noticed Leng Ruoxia's arrival, but he just didn't say it out loud. At this moment, Leng Ruoxia and the demon walked in. Leng Ruoxia's heart ached when she saw you lying on the bed like a pitiful little thing, not knowing what to do. She immediately took you into her arms and gently stroked its soft feathers without saying a word. Seeing that Leng Ruoxia wasn't saying anything, Feng Zhan felt very uncertain. However, he had nowhere to hide because he wasn't in his mimicry form. Sob. It's too late to use the mimicry now. Master. Feather was very uneasy, especially when its master was silent. It didn't know if its master was angry. How should I punish you? You. After a long while, Leng Ruoxia glanced at Feng Zhan, who was also restless, and said indifferently, "You actually dare to hide this from me?" Without giving you a chance to speak, Leng Ruoxia continued. However, her voice was a little colder than before. Master, I was wrong. You quickly admitted his mistake. Where did I go wrong? Leng Ruoxia asked. I shouldn't have hidden it from Master. You said. Yes, there's more. Leng Ruoxia continued to ask without any expression. I shouldn't have let them help me hide this from Master. Yes, voice became softer and softer. Towards the end, she buried her little head into Leng Ruoxia's arms, not daring to raise her head. It's good that you know. How could you hide this from me? Do you think you can hide it from me? Leng Ruoxia's voice became gentler. She no longer tried to scare it, leaving behind only heartache. AI. This little fool, you, was afraid that she would blame herself, so he didn't tell her that he had lost his sight. This made her very upset as a master. Her beastie was too sensible, so sensible that it made her heart ache. It seemed that sometimes, it was not a good thing to respect one's own beastie too much. They even dared to hide things from him. This time, it was also because the evildoer noticed that Leng Ruoxia was a little absent-minded. She was obviously worried about you, yet she wanted to respect her beastie's privacy. He could not bear to see her fidgeting, so he suggested that she secretly come over to take a look. This way, she would be at ease if nothing happened, and if something really happened, it would not be delayed. But now, it seemed that they had come to the right place. Something had indeed happened to you. Thinking of Yes' condition, Leng Ruoxia examined it in detail again. After confirming that only its divine vision had been seriously injured and could be recuperated, she was finally at ease. However, even though she was friendly to you, it didn't mean that she would let the other beasts go. Still not coming out. How long are you going to hide? Leng Ruoxia's tone was a little cold. Hearing this, the little beasts did not dare to hide anymore. They hurriedly came out from their hiding places, which were under the bed and the cupboard. Then, they spontaneously came to Leng Ruoxia's side and acted coquettishly with her. However, Leng Ruoxia was unmoved, her face still cold. Master. We didn't mean to hide it from you. Seeing that their master was still pulling a long face after coaxing them for a long time, the baby was a little scared and quickly admitted its mistake. And, it wasn't on purpose. You guys did it on purpose. Leng Ruoxia came to an important conclusion. The moment she said this, baby's ears drooped down and it looked at Leng Ruoxia pitifully. It looked as obedient as it could be. However, Leng Ruoxia, who was familiar with its temperament, did not fall for it. Master, I know I was wrong. At this moment, the Mei also spoke up, her face still filled with guilt. Yes, I know that Mei is a person who values relationships and loyalty. Don't do it again. Leng Ruoxia caressed Mei's soft fur and said gently. When Mei heard this, she quickly jumped into Leng Ruoxia's arms and rubbed against her affectionately. She was finally at ease. Oh. Master forgave it, that's great. The Mei was extremely excited, but the baby was even more depressed. My lovely master, how can you treat me differently? Baby was extremely aggrieved. His pair of silver eyes met Leng Ruoxiu's resentfully. You're the first one to help you hide it from me, right? Leng Ruoxiu asked with an evil smile. Ah. Baby was speechless. Could it say no? Obviously not. Cute master, I was forced to do this. Baby explained in a low voice. Oh. Tell me about it. Leng Ruoxiu said with a smile. You as my friend, I can't not help him. And you are my master, I don't want to hide it from you, so I am in a dilemma. However, I was also afraid that you would blame yourself for yes' sake. So, I was moved by it. But I was definitely hiding it from you out of goodwill, really. I promise. When Baby said this, it even raised one of its little claws as if it was making an oath to prove that it was not lying. Chapter 2031, Who's the Sheep? 1. In that case, not only should I not punish you, but I should also praise you. Leng Ruoxiu didn't know whether to laugh or cry when she heard her baby's words. This little fox had always been sharp-tongued and was indeed made for diplomacy. However, she was more interested in hearing how it would explain itself. Therefore, when she said this, her face was stern. I'm already very satisfied that my cute master didn't punish me. I don't even dare to ask for praise. After hearing Leng Ruoxiu's words, Baby said with a slight grievance. Do you feel wronged? Leng Ruoxiu glanced at Baby's tiny appearance and said indifferently. I don't feel wronged. Baby hesitated for a moment before saying. Although it said that, its face still had an aggrieved expression. Since you don't feel aggrieved, then accept your punishment. Leng Ruoxiu laughed evilly. All right then. Baby wanted to cry but had no tears. It thought to itself, why isn't it working when it's acting pitiful? At first, it thought that if it pretended to be weak, its cute master would not punish it because of his heartache. Who knew that it had no effect at all? As it thought about it, it really felt wronged. Tears slowly welled up in its eyes, rolling in its beautiful silver eyes, but they did not fall. At this moment, Leng Ruoxiu picked up the small and exquisite treasure with one hand and said in amazement, Oh my, you look so adorable. If I take you out for a walk like this, I don't know how many women will be envious. Baby was dumbfounded when it heard that. It felt that it had overreached itself. Woo-woo. Good master. Good sister. It didn't want to go out like this. Otherwise, it would be swallowed alive by those female tigers outside. Ha ha ha. I've decided that your punishment will be to go out with me like this. Leng Ruoxiu said with a hint of mischief in her voice. Don't. Baby was wailing in pain in its heart. It didn't want to go out. Master, you can't bully an honest fox like this. After thinking about it again and again, it decided to share the good fortune and the bad. So, it made up its mind and said, Cute master, I'm not the only one who has been hiding things from you. Although it had only said half of the sentence, it believed that its smart master would understand. But as soon as it said this, it immediately received daggers from all the beasts. It was obvious that it had angered the public. However, the arrow was already on the bow and had to be released. Therefore, it could only bite the bullet and drag the other beasts into the water. Anyway, even if it didn't say this, its master would punish them. With this in mind, Baby's heart was at ease. You're right. Oh. How should I punish you? Leng Ruoxiu nodded in agreement at Baby's words. Then, her beautiful eyes began to scan the other beasties' bodies, causing the other beasties' hearts to shiver. Feng Zhan felt uncomfortable under Leng Ruoxiu's gaze. He mumbled, I'm not allowed to eat for 3 days. It took the initiative to suggest this. It even thought that this was a very serious punishment for it because it had fallen in love with human food, especially the food at Leng Ruoxiu's house. It was really painful for it not to eat for a day. Isn't 3 days too short? Leng Ruoxiu asked with uncertainty. It's not a small amount. For a foodie, not eating delicious food for a meal is extremely painful. Feng Zhan said with a bitter face. That's true. Then I'll punish you by not eating for 3 days. Leng Ruoxue gave Feng Zhan a lot of face. After all, he was an ancestor of the Phoenix clan. Thank you, little girl. Feng Zhan sighed. What the hell is this? It had to thank her for being punished, but it knew that it was better to take the initiative than to let the little girl settle the score later. If that was the case, its punishment would be even more severe. Confessing and surrendering themselves were the rhythm of admitting their mistakes. Seeing that his problem had been solved, Feng Zhan didn't want to get involved in anything else. He lay on the ground without moving and started to act as an accessory. Seeing that Feng Zhan's punishment was so light, the beasts also complained that they wouldn't eat for 3 days. They only begged their master to forgive them for hiding the truth out of goodwill. However, Leng Ruoxue wouldn't let them have their way. No. Leng Ruoxue rejected him without even thinking. Master, why not? The referee asked in confusion. This punishment is too light for you. Leng Ruoxue said with a smile. It's not light. Didn't grandfather Feng Zhan punish me the same way? Richard was very unconvinced. In fact, it wanted to say that the Mei had not been punished by its master and had been forgiven. Sob, what a huge difference in treatment. It was too unfair. However, it only dared to complain in its heart and did not dare to say it out loud. It's a glutton. Not eating for 3 days is already a heavy punishment, but you guys aren't. Leng Ruoxue replied matter-of-factly. Master, we also like food. Hearing this, all the beastie beasts said in unison. Liking food and being a foodie are two different concepts. So, don't think about it. You'll receive the same punishment. Leng Ruoxue directly destroyed their hopes. Then, she continued, Judge, your punishment is to go farm with Qing Ju for 3 days, Ling will be grounded for 3 days, and Feng Zhan will train with Uncle Ao for 3 days. Leng Ruoxue listed out the punishment for the little beasts one by one. Every time she mentioned a beast, the little beast's face would fall. This was because the punishment that their master was talking about was the punishment that they hated the most. Hee hee. Little guy, you've finally fallen into my hands. Ao Jia looked at Feng Zhan and said with his eyes shining. Leng Ruoxue's punishment made him very excited. This was the youngest son of the Phoenix King. He had to teach her well. As he thought of this, he instantly thought of several training plans in his heart. He was prepared to train Feng Zhan well. When Feng Zhan saw the happy and wretched expression on Ao Jia's face, he thought about how to get rid of it. With this, their battle of wits and courage had officially begun. Leng Ruoxue did not care about the undercurrent between them. After she was done explaining the punishment for the beasts, she carried Yu and left with the demon. AI. As soon as they left, a series of sighs could be heard in Yes' room. Ao Jia picked up Feng Zhan, who was still struggling, and left. Damn it, let me go. Don't touch me. Feng Zhan's howls reverberated in the bangle. However, the old phoenixes all pretended to be deaf and mute. This was the little girl's punishment, and they could only watch. At that moment, Uncle Dragon, who was drinking tea in the garden, saw Ao Jia returning with a little phoenix in his arms. His face was full of question marks. This little phoenix is, Uncle Long was very curious. He knew that the little girl had phoenixes, but these phoenixes would not appear in front of him easily. To put it bluntly, they did not meet outsiders. He's the youngest son of the Phoenix King. I'll train the little girl for 3 days. Ao Jia said with a smile. His wrinkled old face was about to burst into a smile. Chapter 2032, Who's the Sheep? 2, You're an Eagle. Uncle Long was stunned and reminded him. Although the training of beasts was similar, eagles and phoenixes were not of the same race. This unreliable guy wouldn't train this little phoenix into an eagle, right? That would be fun to watch. I know. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. I'll train it just like how the Phoenix King trained me. Ao Jia said seriously. However, After hearing this, Uncle Dragon's face darkened even more. Looking at Aojia, Uncle Dragon was speechless. He couldn't help but think to himself, how are these the same? What kind of person was the Phoenix King? Their training must have been arranged according to the characteristics of your eagle clan, but do you know anything about phoenixes? Do you know how phoenixes raise their offspring? Furthermore, although this little phoenix was still young, it was already a 9th-ranked sacred beast. Did it still need to be trained? Who wants you to train? Let go of me, you ugly monster. At this time, Feng Zhan also shouted out in a rather uncooperative manner. Seeing the little phoenix's resistance, Uncle Dragon was even more pessimistic about Aojie. Hee. Even if you don't want to, you can't. This is what your master said. Aojie had Leng Ruoxu's support, so he was not afraid of Feng Zhan's provocation. Hearing this, Feng Zhan became listless. Wu, master. Be obedient. Otherwise, I'll tell the little girl that you're not going to accept your punishment. Aojie gave Uncle Long a triumphant look and then said to Feng Zhan. However, Feng Zhan was too lazy to even lift his eyes. He didn't want to bother with this fellow who was using his power to intimidate others. What's going on? Hearing Aojie's words, the question mark on Uncle Long's face grew bigger. Seeing this, Aojie described what happened to Uncle Long. After Uncle Long heard it, his expression became serious. Old whale, don't worry. We'll find a way. Seeing Uncle Dragon's expression, Aojie knew what Uncle Dragon was worried about, so he could only comfort him. In fact, he was not confident, but now was definitely not the time to attack the morale. The next morning, after Leng Ruoxue finished her breakfast, she pulled the evildoer along with her and left the inn. This time, they swaggered out of the inn. Of course, she did not forget to bring her precious along. However, when the inn's waiter saw Leng Ruoxue, he was stunned because he did not remember such a handsome man coming to stay the night. However, he did not think too much about it and immediately treated Leng Ruoxue as a friend of the inn's customer. From this, it could be seen that his mental endurance was also unusually strong. However, before Leng Ruoxue and the demon left the room, the waiter kindly reminded them, the management of the imperial city has been quite strict recently, so you must be very careful when you go out and don't cause trouble. Otherwise, the consequences will be unimaginable. Thanks for the reminder. The demon put on a grateful expression and pulled Leng Ruoxue to the streets. When they arrived on the street, the two of them realized that the security in the imperial city was indeed much tighter than it had been a few days ago. There were guards dressed in the uniform of the guards of the Divine Master's estate everywhere on the street. They patrolled the streets and would even stop and interrogate suspicious people when they saw them. The two of them strolled around the streets with mutual understanding. Baby obediently lay on Leng Ruoxue's shoulder, pretending to be weak. At this moment, Leng Ruoxue saw a shop that specialized in selling medicinal herbs and pulled the evil demon in. The imperial city was quite prosperous. The streets were filled with shops, and all kinds of goods were available. However, even if the shops here did not belong to the Divine Lord's estate, they were closely related to it. The shop they were entering had the sign of the Divine Lord's estate, a red blood lotus. Normally, the blood lotus and the blood cherry blossom were very similar, but if one looked closely, one would discover the differences between the two. The blood lotus was a truly famous flower. It was extremely valuable in the divine realm and also had a certain medicinal value. However, the blood cherry blossom was a completely poisonous flower that liked to drink blood. Although the two of them were both blood red in color, the blood cherry blossom's red color carried a hint of blood. However, because the blood lotus was the symbol of the God Lord's estate, there was no one in the divine realm who did not recognize the blood lotus. As for the blood cherry blossom, not many people knew about it. After Leng Ruoxue and the demon walked into the shop, the waiter merely blinked and ignored them completely. This kind of disregard might be considered rude to others, but it was exactly what the two of them wanted. The two of them walked towards the shelf without a sound and casually sized up the medicinal herbs on it. However, their divine senses were constantly observing the actions of the waiter in the shop. However, the waiter really did not care about them because he knew that the things he sold here were extraordinarily expensive. Even if it was just an ordinary medicinal herb, the price was twice as expensive as outside. There were very few people who bought it. Leng Ruoxue had also noticed this problem, so she had no intention of buying anything here. At this moment, a few well-dressed people walked in from the outside. However, Leng Ruoxue and the demon's back was facing them. When the waiter saw them, he immediately put on a smile and went up to welcome them. "Your Excellency Exalt Huang, why are you here today?" The waiter asked the man in the lead with a humble smile, his face full of flattery. But in reality, he was thinking, how unlucky. This vampire is here again, sigh. He was going to bleed again. Although he was flattering them on the surface, the waiter really hated these people. However, he was just a small waiter, and this shop did not belong to him. Therefore, even though he hated them, he did not have the courage to offend these people from the Divine Master's estate. After all, these people were not the most powerful and terrifying people in the Divine Master's estate. However, his master still couldn't afford to offend him. More importantly, this person had a backer. The entire imperial city is heavily guarded now, and I'm in charge of this area, so I naturally had to come and take a look. By the way, how's business? Exalt Huang asked with concern. His words were extremely grand, but the waiter knew very well that this person was here for money. The business is all right. My master even said a few days ago that he wanted to thank Exalt Huang for taking care of him. However, Master just so happens to not be here right now. The waiter only finished half of his sentence before he raised his head to look at Exalt Huang. However, the meaning behind his words was obvious. Master is not here, you have come for nothing. I can't make the decision. Hee, that's really unfortunate. However, I have a message for your master. The bidding for the exclusive management rights of the Divine Master's residence is about to start again, so tell him to make preparations in advance. Exalt Huang said with a smile. He didn't look like he was going to make things difficult for the waiter, but the waiter's heart sank when he heard this. Wasn't this a blatant threat? The exclusive management rights of the Divine Lord's residence meant that merchants were allowed to operate shops in the Imperial City under the name of the Divine Lord's residence. However, they had to pay the Divine Lord's residence a very high naming right. Similarly, these shops could enjoy the highest discounts in the Imperial City. However, this did not mean that other people were not allowed to operate shops in the Imperial City. However, the shops that were not under the name of the Divine Lord's residence had to pay the highest taxes in the Imperial City. They would have almost no profit. Chapter 2033, Who's the Sheep? 3. Even so, it was the dream of many families to own a shop in the Imperial City. They regarded it as an honor, so even if they couldn't make much money here, they still had to provide for these vampires. Many people were willing to do so. The exclusive management rights of the God Lord's manor were limited to 100 years. This year was the last year of the 100 years, so the waiter didn't expect that Exalt Huang would remind him today. It seemed that Exalt Huang was deliberately making things difficult for them because he didn't get any benefits from them. Although his heart was clear, the waiter still had to put on a smile and said, "I'll let my master know." "Thank you for your reminder, Exalt Huang." "Yes." Exalt Huang nodded in satisfaction. Just as he was about to leave, the yellow-clothed girl beside him suddenly shouted, "Big brother! I want that fox." "What fox?" Exalt Huang was a little puzzled. Then, he looked in the direction the girl in yellow was pointing at and realized that there were outsiders in the shop. However, he didn't take it to heart because these two people weren't very strong. A purple fox with a big furry tail was lying on one of them. Women just like these useless things. Exalt Huang thought to himself, but he still spoke in a commanding tone, "My sister has taken a fancy to your fox. Hand it over." When Leng Ruoxue and the evildoer, who had their backs facing them, heard Exalt Huang's words, they looked at each other speechlessly. They felt rather helpless. Was this considered an unexpected calamity? In fact, if Exalt Huang had not taken the initiative to speak, the two of them had no intention of paying attention to him at all. After eavesdropping on his conversation with the waiter for a while, the two of them had also concluded in their hearts that this fellow was not a good person. Therefore, the two of them had been pretending to pick medicinal herbs without looking back. Who knew that his sister would actually take a fancy to a treasure? Left with no choice, the two of them turned around. Then, Leng Ruoxue pretended to be unhappy and said, "The treasure is mine, I won't give it to anyone else." After he finished speaking, he even held the treasure tightly in his arms, as if he was afraid that they would snatch it away, and conveniently ignored the waiter's sympathetic gaze that flashed past them. When Exalt Huang saw the sissy Leng Ruoxue, his eyes brightened. He was so shocked that his heart was beating wildly. Leng Ruoxue's appearance was like a dazzling ray of light that lit up his entire life. He knew that he had been struck by something called love. In an instant, Exalt Huang's gaze towards Leng Ruoxue became more and more passionate. This man had all the beautiful fantasies in his heart. Today, he could finally fulfill his wish. He was so excited that his body was trembling. A cold glint flashed in the demonic man's eyes when he saw Exalt Huang being shot by Cupid's arrow. He shot daggers at Exalt Huang, but Exalt Huang, who was currently immersed in the river of love, didn't feel any danger approaching. As for Leng Ruoxue, when she saw Exalt Huang's lustful look, she felt extremely depressed. Could it be that this fellow could tell that she was a girl? However, that was impossible, right? It was impossible for this fellow to have Sun Wukong's fiery eyes. More importantly, she believed in Green Vessel's ability. Aside from that, Exalt Huang's gaze was too fiery, causing Leng Ruoxue to have goosebumps all over. This was the first time she realized that being stared at by a strange man like this could make her go crazy. Yes. Leng Ruoxue was going crazy. In fact, Exalt Huang was quite good-looking. He had thick eyebrows, big eyes, regular facial features, a tall and strong body, and his strength was also not ordinary. He was a divine emperor. Other than his eyes being a little hot, there was nothing too obscene about him. He was even far away from being vulgar. However, she was a man now. He was a genuine man, so she couldn't understand why Exalt Huang was looking at her with such a fiery and passionate gaze. At this moment, Leng Ruoxue would never have thought that Exalt Huang wasn't lustful towards women. He liked men, especially men like her who had the temperament of a submissive. She was Exalt Huang's favorite. "Young master, what is your name?" Exalt Huang, who had finally regained his senses, looked at Leng Ruoxue with deep affection and asked. "Ugh! When did the young master's name become a beautiful name?" Leng Ruoxue's mind was in a mess when she heard Exalt Huang's question. However, she still replied politely, "Im Zhou Kun." She had plagiarized again. She had no choice. When she saw Mr. Huang, she wanted to tell him a slightly more vulgar name. Therefore, she thought of Zhou Kun immediately. "So it's young master Zhou. It's an honor. I am Huang Shou. He's a consecrator of the God Lord's estate." Huang Shou took the initiative to introduce himself. At this time, the yellow-clothed woman beside him couldn't wait any longer. She pulled on Huang Shou's lapels and loudly reminded, "Brother, I want that fox." "Why are you talking so much nonsense?" "I'm sorry, the treasure is mine, I won't give it to anyone else." Without waiting for Huang Shou's response, Leng Ruoxue rejected him again. "Humph. You sissy, it's your honor that I'm interested in your beast pet, don't be so ungrateful." The yellow-robed lady was enraged after hearing Leng Ruoxue's words. However, Leng Ruoxue wasn't afraid of her at all. She only looked at Huang Shou, waiting to see what he would say. When Huang Shou saw Leng Ruoxue's resentful beautiful eyes, his heart immediately melted into a puddle of water. He quickly promised, "Brother Zhou, don't worry. That fox is yours. No one will be able to take it away from you." "Little brother Zhou." Leng Ruoxue was shocked. This guy was really friendly. In such a short time, she had become a good brother. However, now was not the time to be calculative about this, so she put on a grateful look and said, "I'm relieved to hear that, exalt Huang." However, even though she was relieved, the yellow-clothed woman was not. The yellow-clothed woman shouted angrily, "Big brother! I'm your sister. How can you help an outsider and not me?" "Humph. I'll definitely tell the old ancestor that you're a traitor. Don't talk nonsense. When did I betray you? Junior brother Zhou isn't an outsider, so how can you just take his beloved beast? Isn't it just a fox? When I have time, I'll catch one for you." The moment Huang Shou heard his sister's words, he immediately coaxed her. In fact, in his heart, his sister was not as important as Leng Ruoxue. After all, it was not easy to meet a man who could move his heart so much. Therefore, he would definitely not allow his sister to ruin his relationship. "Then I'll get a purple fox too." The yellow-clothed woman saw that Huang Shou seemed to be a little angry, so she could only say this unwillingly. "No problem." "Yes," Huang Shou replied. In his heart, he was thinking that he should send someone to inform the Fox clan leader when he had the time and ask him to send a purple fox over. This was to prevent his sister from having any ideas about the fox and making the beauty unhappy. After obtaining her brother's permission, the yellow-robed lady finally stopped. However, her eyes would still drift towards the treasure from time to time. However, she was ignored by Leng Ruoxue because she was in a dilemma. This yellow beast had said that she was not an outsider. When Leng Ruoxue heard this, she really wanted to ask him, "What am I if not an outsider?" However, after thinking about it, it was better not to ask. Otherwise, she was afraid that she wouldn't be able to bear the shocking words this beast said. After settling his younger sister, he saw Leng Ruoxue remaining silent. Huang Shou's heart felt like it was being scratched by a cat. This beautiful woman's silent look really made his heart itch. At this time, he really wanted to hold the beauty in his arms and make out, but he was afraid that he would scare the beauty. After some thought, Huang Shou took the initiative to invite him. "Brother Zhou, you haven't been to the Divine Lord's estate, have you? Why don't I invite you to the Divine Master's estate as a guest?" Huang Shou's face was full of pride after he finished speaking, and he almost raised his tail. Of course, the premise was that he had the words. He firmly believed that Zhou Kun, who was in front of him, would definitely not be able to refuse his words. After all, who in the Divine Realm did not want to go to the Divine Lord's residence to broaden their horizons? Unfortunately, not everyone would have such an opportunity. Huang Shou's words stunned Leng Ruoxue. This person wanted to invite her to the Divine Master's estate. What was this? After exchanging glances with the demon, Leng Ruoxue nodded in agreement. After all, it would be a waste not to go. This was an opportunity to enter the Divine Lord's residence openly. Huang Shou had already expected that Leng Ruoxue would not be able to reject him, but when he saw that she had agreed, he let out a long sigh of relief. Only then did he realize that he had been waiting nervously for her reply. Sob. This was too much torture for his heart. Then, to avoid any more trouble, he quickly said to Leng Ruoxue, "Brother Zhou, come with me." "All right." Leng Ruoxue nodded and pulled the demon away with her. However, Huang Shou was obviously not satisfied with the demon as he was just a burden. In order to please Leng Ruoxue, he had no choice but to accept the demon's existence. However, he had been feeling sullen all this while. After they left the pharmacy, the waiters in the pharmacy all watched their backs in disbelief. They couldn't help but think in their hearts that strange things happened every year, but there were especially many today. This was the first time he had seen Huang Shou speak to someone so politely and in such a humble manner. Suddenly, an idea suddenly came to his mind. Could it be that Huang Shou has taken a fancy to her? With this in mind, Huang Shou's attitude seemed much more reasonable, because there had always been rumors that he liked men. AI. What a pitiful guy. He had sent a sheep into the tiger's mouth. For a moment, his sympathy for Leng Ruoxue was like the waves of the river, endless. However, if Leng Ruoxue knew what he was thinking, she would definitely ask, who is the sheep? Chapter 2034, Chapter 2034 Chaos. 1. Len Ruoxue had never thought of herself as a sheep. If she was a sheep, she would definitely be a wolf in sheep's clothing. However, she didn't know what the waiter was thinking, so she couldn't refute him. Along the way, Huang Shou kept trying to strike up a conversation with Len Ruoxue. Unfortunately, Len Ruoxue ignored him. However, this did not dispel Huang Shou's enthusiasm. Instead, it made him more courageous. Huang Shou looked at Len Ruoxue, who was ignoring him, and felt depressed. However, he wouldn't cherish something that was easily obtained. Len Ruoxue was the perfect person for him to get what he couldn't get. Therefore, he treated Len Ruoxue even more diligently, while the demon's face grew darker and darker. He threw daggers at Huang Shou, but the man only had eyes for the beauty, so he ignored the cold and evil look. However, the frosty qi that was released from the evildoer's body was enough to freeze a radius of 100 miles. It made Len Ruoxue's heart tremble. Sob. She did not need to ask to know that the evildoer was angry. However, this was none of her business. However, she knew that the consequences would be serious if the demon was angry, so she subconsciously stayed away from the 2 barrels of explosives that could explode at any time. However, in the next second, Len Ruoxue was held tightly by a pair of strong arms, unable to move. In that instant, Huang Shou exploded. Damn it! Let go of my brother Zhou! Huang Shou roared in jealousy. His eyes were bloodshot with jealousy and hatred, and he couldn't help but curse in his heart. I haven't even hugged this beauty yet. How could he let an outsider have it? That's right, the evildoer was an outsider in his eyes, while Len Ruoxue was his wife. So, when Huang Shou saw someone hugging his wife, one could imagine how angry he was. However, the evildoer only glanced at him indifferently, and Huang Shou's heart trembled. He swallowed the rest of the words he wanted to say, and forgot to say them. Huang Shou quickly reacted. When he thought about how he had actually been frightened by a weak ugly person, he felt as if he had eaten a dead fly. Damn it, the other party was merely a god king. What was there to be afraid of? He thought that the demon only had the strength of a divine king. Therefore, when he realized what was going on, his anger multiplied. One should know that a divine king was nothing in the imperial city. Any waiter in any shop could have the strength of a divine king. Therefore, it was a great humiliation for him to be frightened by the demon. At this moment, he wanted to kill the demon. However, this ugly monster was with a beauty, so he couldn't do it now. With that thought in mind, he suddenly changed his attitude and smiled at the evildoer. Then, he said apologetically, I'm sorry, I was a little too excited just now. A man must know when to yield and when to stand tall, so he must not let the beauty see that he had any dissatisfaction with this ugly woman. Huang Shou thought that he had hidden his emotions well. Unfortunately, in the eyes of Len Ruoxue and the demon, he was like a clown. The 2 of them didn't even take him to heart. After walking for a while, the 2 finally arrived near the tall and magnificent building of the Divine Master's estate. However, Huang Shou did not lead them through the main entrance. Instead, he led them to the back door of the Divine Master's estate after many turns. After entering, Len Ruoxue looked at the ordinary-looking courtyard in front of her and was speechless. Who told her that this was the Divine Master's residence? Although they had entered the Divine Master's estate through the back door, there was a wall between this place and the spacious main courtyard of the Divine Master's estate. Even if there was a small door on the wall, there were at least 4 guards standing guard there. There was no way they could stroll around the Divine Master's estate like this. Instantly, Len Ruoxue felt as if she had been tricked. However, Huang Shou didn't think that he had lied to Len Ruoxue. He even explained with a smile, Junior Zhou, this is the courtyard we live in. The main building of the Divine Lord's estate is right next to it. However, it's heavily guarded, so even I can't go there often. As a result, I can only trouble Junior Zhou to stay with me for the time being. As long as there's an opportunity, I'll definitely bring Junior Zhou over to broaden his horizons. Leng Ruoxue didn't deny Huang Shou's promise. Then, she smiled charmingly and said, "Exalt Huang is too polite. I'm already very satisfied to be able to pay my respects to the Divine Lord's estate." Leng Ruoxue's understanding made Huang Shou fall in love with her even more, and the beautiful smile she had just shown made Huang Shou feel so happy that he couldn't even find the north. Following that, Huang Shou considerately arranged rooms for Leng Ruoxue and the demon. As they were his guests, they stayed in his courtyard. Naturally, he arranged for Leng Ruoxue's room to be next to his. As for the demon's room, he arranged it to be further away from them. Seeing that his room was so far away from Shuai, the demon was furious. "Why isn't my room next to hers?" The demon looked at Leng Ruoxue and questioned Huang Shou in dissatisfaction. He could not bring himself to call her Zhou Kun and Shuai. Other than junior brother Zhou's room, there's only one empty room. "You're not going to stay there, but do you want junior brother Zhou to stay there?" Huang Shou said matter-of-factly. Furthermore, he had treated the evildoer as Leng Ruoxue's lackey. Hence, from the bottom of his heart, he believed that the evildoer would not dare to do such a thing. Unfortunately, he had underestimated the monster. After the demon heard his words, he smiled and said indifferently, "That's a good idea. Let's switch rooms." He couldn't ask for more. It would be strange if he wanted Shuai to be too close to Huang Shou. In fact, it was fine if Leng Ruoxue stayed next door to Huang Shou. The demon would never let Leng Ruoxue stay by herself. Unfortunately, he was a man who was protective of his food. Even though he knew it was fine, he didn't want Shuai to stay by the side of a man who had bad intentions towards her. Even if he was by her side, he couldn't. He was just this overbearing, and Leng Ruoxue understood that. Hence, she naturally wouldn't object. Seeing that Leng Ruoxue didn't have any objections and even indulged this ugly woman, Huang Shou felt as if he had drunk a jar of old vinegar. No matter how he looked at this demon, he didn't like it. However, he couldn't act up in front of Leng Ruoxue, so as not to leave a bad impression on her. So, he was in a dilemma. He hated the evildoer to death, but he couldn't do anything to him. This wasn't an ordinary kind of grievance. After consoling himself for a while, Huang Shou could finally get by in the room. However, he had no intention of being nice to the evildoer in private. So, when Leng Ruoxue wasn't paying attention, the two of them would exchange glances with each other. However, Huang Shou would always be defeated. After a few times, the evildoer had become Huang Shou's biggest threat. In addition, Leng Ruoxue and the evildoer were showing their intimacy from time to time, which greatly stimulated Huang Shou. When no one was around, Huang Shou would keep asking why. He couldn't figure it out. Whether it was his appearance, family background, or strength, he was above that ugly woman. However, his younger brother Zhou just had to listen to that ugly woman's words. This fact was a huge blow to him. Chapter 2035, Chapter 2034 Chaos, 2. Fortunately, there were a lot of things to do in the Divine Master's residence for the past 2 days. Hence, he did not have to worry about it for long before he was so busy that his feet did not touch the ground. On the other hand, Leng Ruoxue and the demon were no longer bothered by the third wheel, so they settled down temporarily in the Divine Master's residence. When no one was around, the two of them would stay in the bracelet. When Huang Shou was around, the demon would stay in Leng Ruoxue's room. On a certain day, Huang Shou had just finished his work and had rushed over to see Leng Ruoxue. Who knew that the person who opened the door for him was a demon? The moment he saw her, the anger in his heart rose uncontrollably. "Don't you have your own room? What are you doing here all day?" Huang Shou roared in anger. Since this guy was always in his brother Zhou's room, why would he want to exchange rooms with him? Otherwise, every time he returned to his room, he would be able to see how happy his younger brother Zhou was. It was a pity that there was such a third wheel. She was really angry no matter how she thought about it. "I'm happy, all right." After the demon finished speaking, he turned around and entered the room. Huang Shou was stunned, and the anger in his heart burned even more. After he came back to his senses, he quickly followed. Seeing Leng Ruoxue sitting in the small living room drinking tea and eating snacks, Huang Shou felt extremely aggrieved. With a face full of hidden bitterness, he said, "Brother Zhou, how can you be in the same room as a man? This is not good for your reputation." God knew how busy he had been these few days. The Divine Master had gone crazy and called all of them over to interrogate their ancestors. Then, he ordered them to pay attention to any suspicious people in the imperial city. They had no time to rest these few days. He finally had some free time, so he specially came to see his beloved younger brother Zhou, and even met this third wheel, so he felt as wronged as he could. In reality, he did not know that ever since Wu Xian and Leng Ruoxue had left for the second time, she had ordered the guards of the God Lord's estate to check on suspicious people. However, for some reason, the guards had all fallen seriously ill in the past few days. The God Lord had no choice but to let the elders and sinecures in the God Lord's estate participate in this matter. Some of them were also in charge of the security of the God Lord's estate. Otherwise, the God Lord's estate would be short-handed. Therefore, Huang Shou had been very busy these few days. He was so busy that he did not dare to think about Leng Ruoxue because the Divine Master's emotions were very unstable. He did not dare to make a single mistake, or he might lose his life. And under Lord Divine Master's rage, there were already people who suffered. After working for a few days, the Divine Master finally gave them a few hours of break to rest. He did not even think before he came to Leng Ruoxue's place. However, he met his biggest love rival here. This made him feel extremely uncomfortable. Seeing Huang Shou's aggrieved expression and hearing his bitter words, Leng Ruoxue's face was filled with black lines. Then, she couldn't help but remind him, "Exalt Huang, I'm also a man. It's precisely because Brother Zhou is a man that we have to be more careful. After all, it's more troublesome for Feiyu to spread rumors between men, and not every family can accept such things. I don't want Brother Zhou to be hurt." Huang Shou's words were said with Leng Ruoxue's best interests at heart, and his eyes that kept throwing charming looks at Leng Ruoxue were filled with endless affection. "Thank you for thinking about me, Exalt Huang. I'm so touched." Leng Ruoxue was a little speechless. Then, she pretended not to understand and asked with a puzzled look, "Exalt Huang, are your eyes cramping? Why do you keep blinking?" Leng Ruoxue's words made Huang Shou feel defeated. He was trying to seduce her, okay? It wasn't a cramp. Even though he was furious, he could not bear to vent his anger on Leng Ruoxue. As for that ugly woman, the two of them had fought so many times, both overtly and covertly, but he had never won once. Therefore, before he had absolute confidence, he did not want to provoke that fellow. In fact, even if he were to take the initiative to provoke her now, she might not even bother with him. He was well aware of this. With this thought in mind, Huang Shou stood up immediately and bade Leng Ruoxue goodbye before he turned around and left. Seeing that Huang Shou had left so quickly this time, the demon was a little uncomfortable. Why did he leave so quickly? The demon was somewhat regretful. He had not properly dealt with the yellow beast yet. What? Are you planning to make him stay for dinner? Leng Ruoxue looked at the evildoer speechlessly and asked him back. Then, with a thought, she brought the two of them into the bangle. Seeing that they had returned, the smiling Uncle Long couldn't help but tease them, "Why is that little yellow beast so listless? You guys didn't do anything, did you?" He and Ao Jia could see everything that happened in the room with Leng Ruoxue, the demon, and yellow beast through the screen. "It's not that I didn't do anything, but I didn't have the chance to do anything." Leng Ruoxue laughed lightly as she teased. "That's true. Recently, the God Lord's manor has been giving them a lot of trouble," Uncle Long said sympathetically. This was all Shuai'er's doing. On her first day here, she had sent her little beasts out to put some medicine in the well water of the Divine Master's estate. It was obvious that it was not the first time the little beasts had done this. They were all familiar with it and were very excited. However, out of caution, Leng Ruoxue asked them to return immediately after she had drugged them. Otherwise, who knew what these mischievous little beasts would do? In fact, Uncle Long knew very well that the reason these little beasts worked so hard was because they had been punished by Shuai for 3 days. They had been holding back their anger for a long time, and they had vented it all on the people of the Divine Master's estate. As a result, those people were in trouble. Although the medicine in the well water might not have much of an effect on the people of the immortal realm, gods were also cultivated by mortals. Therefore, many people were still very concerned about eating, drinking, and sleeping. Even if they did not really need it, they could not completely abandon these habits. Otherwise, Shuai-er's idea might not have succeeded. However, Uncle Long was clear that Shuai-er was just trying to stand up for you. Although she didn't attack them ruthlessly, those people would probably end up worse. The truth was just as Uncle Long had expected. Although the guards of the Divine Master's estate were not in any life-threatening danger, they had suffered a lot. Not only did they feel an unbearable itch all over their bodies, but they also had diarrhea. Many of them had gone pale and collapsed. In addition, each of them had different symptoms. In addition to itchiness and diarrhea, some of them even had a foul smell. In short, they had all kinds of conditions, but they were not fatal. No matter what detox pill they took, they could not cure the problems in their bodies. For a time, the God Lord's estate was filled with complaints, and it was shrouded in a dark cloud. Unfortunately, no matter how angry they were, they couldn't find the culprit who had caused them to be in this state. This fact made them so depressed that they almost vomited blood. Therefore, in recent days, the sky above the Divine Master's estate would brew a storm at any time. The people of the Divine Master's estate had also tucked their tails between their legs and were careful not to offend the Divine Master. Chapter 2036, Chapter 2036 Chaos, 3. In contrast to their troubles, Leng Ruoxue and the rest led a very carefree life. Not only did they have good food and drinks to serve them, the yellow beasts did not have the chance to disturb her. More importantly, they could see the God Lord's estate in a mess every day. This had become a must-watch program for Uncle Long, the rest, and the beasts. However, even though she had already turned the Divine Master's residence into a mess, Leng Ruoxue was still not happy. Although the secret room was the most suspicious, it had not been confirmed. Even if it was confirmed that it was the place where the fog's main body was stored, she was not very confident that she could obtain the petals of the fog's main body. Whenever she thought of this, Leng Ruoxue would feel a little frustrated. However, she would try her best not to show her emotions in front of Uncle Long. Hence, after hearing Uncle Long's words, Leng Ruoxue smiled evilly and said, "I'm planning to make the Divine Master's estate more chaotic." What? When Uncle Long heard this, he was extremely interested. Ao Jia, who was beside him, could not help but perk his ears as he looked at Leng Ruoxue with anticipation. Seeing their expressions, Leng Ruoxue took out a few black balls the size of a baby's fist. These balls were the explosive balls that she had modified, and their power was much stronger than before. However, Uncle Long had never seen such an item before. After all, Leng Ruoxue had only used it a few times. "Girl, what is this?" Seeing that Leng Ruoxue was deliberately keeping him in suspense, Uncle Long could not help but ask directly. "This is an explosive ball," Leng Ruoxue said with a smile. "Exploding balls? Don't tell me this little thing is going to explode?" Ao Jia asked in surprise. "Not bad." Leng Ruoxue nodded her head slightly. She could not help but think to herself, "I can't do anything to Wu Xian, but can't I deal with the rest of the people in the Divine Master's estate?" "Ah. Little girl, you're not thinking of blowing up the Divine Master's residence, are you?" Uncle Long asked in horror. This girl's idea was crazy. The Divine Master's residence was not that easy to blow up. Hee. I had the same intention," Leng Ruoxue said with a smile. "Girl, the Divine Master's residence is very sturdy and is protected by a defensive formation. It's not that easy to blow it up." Although Ao Jia was very much looking forward to Leng Ruoxue's words, he was not very optimistic about her thinking. If the Divine Master's residence was blown up so easily, then wouldn't they become the laughingstock of the divine world? Of course, no one dared to laugh to their faces, but behind their backs, the dignity of the Divine Master's estate would be swept to the ground. After thinking about it, he felt that Shuai's idea was not bad. Unfortunately, he knew very well that the old whale would never agree to this. This was because this idea was too crazy and dangerous. It's okay. I didn't expect to blow up the Divine Master's residence, but I can still disgust her. Len Ruoxue said disapprovingly. In fact, her original intention was to cause trouble for Ripple Mist. Who asked her to be in a bad mood? Girl, I don't agree. It's too dangerous. The God Lord's estate is now more heavily guarded than before. Perhaps Wu Chan's divine sense is also watching the God Lord's estate's movements at all times. If we attack and she finds out, we'll be in a passive position. Uncle Long said worriedly. Uncle Long, don't worry. I know what I'm doing. Len Ruoxue promised. However, Uncle Long still looked at her worriedly. In the end, it was Qing Ju who stepped in and promised that he would not be discovered by Wu Jing. Only then did Uncle Long finally let go of his worries. Actually, Uncle Long was well aware of Qing Ju's capabilities. However, from his perspective, this was completely different from what he was worried about. Furthermore, he was also afraid that Shuai would rely too much on Qing Ju and act recklessly. Hence, he had to let Len Ruoxue have a sense of crisis. That was why he would occasionally oppose Shuai's opinions. He hoped that she would be able to face the problems that she was facing. Len Ruoxue was also very clear about Uncle Long's thoughts. Therefore, whenever there was a problem, she would discuss it with them. If they had a different opinion, she would find a way to persuade them to agree. Therefore, the final result would always be her victory. Who asked her to have a demon who supported her unconditionally and the help of the powerful green vessel? When she thought of this, the way she looked at the evildoer became more and more tender, making the evildoer's heart beat wildly. Uncle Long and Ao Jia coughed a few times when they saw the two of them flirting with each other. Then, the two of them said seriously, since the girl has already decided, then let's act quickly. Now that the matter had been settled, they were even more anxious than Len Ruoxue. However, it wasn't too late yet, and it wasn't a good time to do bad things. So, Len Ruoxue could only temporarily find something else for the two anxious old men to do. He asked them to go fishing in the stream under the waterfall in the bracelet, and the fish they caught would naturally be their dinner. Moreover, they were not allowed to use divine power or divine skills. They could only use fishing rods. This time, the two of them had a hard time. The two of them had never fished before. Not to mention using a fishing rod. In fact, if the two of them wanted to eat fish, they could have just gone into the river to catch it. However, Shuai insisted that the two of them use some kind of fishing rod. Looking at the fishing rod that was much thinner than their fingers, the two of them were in a miserable state, but they still walked towards the stream in resignation. There were quite a lot of fish in the stream, but as soon as the two of them got close, all the fish in the stream hid under the grass and refused to come out. The two of them looked at each other speechlessly. Fuck. The fish in the stream were too much of a bully. They had seen it with their own eyes. The moment those fish saw Len Ruoxue, they would take the initiative to come to her. Now that they were seeing them, the two of them almost vomited blood from anger. However, as depressed as they were, the two still took the initiative to fish in the stream. However, after waiting for a long time, not a single fish took the bait. This fact made the two depressed old men speechless and not know what to say. Even when Len Ruoxue sent Beastie to call the two of them for dinner, they still did not manage to find anything. When they were eating, both of them were frowning. Seeing this situation, Len Ruoxue felt a little guilty. In fact, she asked Uncle Dragon and Ao Jia to go fishing just to let them find something to do to pass the time. Who knew that the beast's innate pressure actually scared the fish in the stream away? And Uncle Dragon and Ao Jia couldn't use violence on the fish in the stream, so they didn't find anything. What Leng Ruoxue didn't expect was that not being able to catch a fish would be such a huge blow to the two of them. For a moment, she didn't know how to comfort the two. Leng Ruoxue was a little embarrassed as she said, "Uncle Long, Uncle Ao, the fish in this space are extremely cunning. Therefore, you must not take it to heart. And, we don't mind. Old man Ao and I have decided to go fishing there every day in the future. I don't believe that we really can't catch a single fish." Uncle Long gritted his teeth. He was going to fight with the fish. "You call this not angry?" Hearing Uncle Long's words, Leng Ruoxue's face was filled with black lines. She never thought that her failed fishing attempt would deal such a huge blow to Uncle Long and Ao Jie. Now, she was so regretful. Seeing Leng Ruoxue's conflicted expression, the demon smiled at Uncle Long and Ao Jie. "Yes, I support your idea, but there's no time for you to fish now. We have to settle the Divine Master's residence first." "Yes, little brat Yi is right. The God Lord's manor is the most important thing." Uncle Long nodded in agreement. His attention was immediately diverted. Leng Ruoxue heaved a sigh of relief when she saw this. After dinner, the sky was already dark. Furthermore, after dinner, the sky suddenly turned dark. It was a sign that a storm was coming. Leng Ruoxue felt that the heavens were helping them with this sudden change in weather. However, Uncle Long and Ao Jie were a little worried. "Girl, it looks like it's going to rain soon. Is your exploding ball afraid of water?" Uncle Long was very worried. He didn't want to waste his efforts. "Yup. Little girl, why don't we do it another day?" Ao Jie said. "It's fine. Uncle Long, Uncle Ao, don't you worry. Tonight's weather is perfect for us to do bad things." Leng Ruoxue laughed evilly. Seeing how confident she was, Uncle Long and Ao Jie were not as worried anymore. Then, Qingju turned the bangle into a small speck of dust again, and it drifted with the wind in the Divine Master's residence. Every time they arrived at a place, Leng Ruoxue and the rest would continuously throw explosive balls at that place through the light screen. Originally, Leng Ruoxue could have done this alone, but in order to let Uncle Long and Ao Jie have a sense of participation, they had added the two of them. As for the monster incarnate and the beasts, they were just there along the way. After walking around the Divine Master's residence, they saw that it was already raining heavily. However, such weather was perfect for Leng Ruoxue. Hence, their journey was unimaginably smooth. When they returned to the room Huang Shou had arranged for Leng Ruoxue, Uncle Long and Ao Jie felt as if they were in a dream. It did not feel real. "It's done." Ao Jie sat in the garden in his bracelet and looked at Uncle Long in a daze. At this moment, there were only the two of them. Leng Ruoxue, the demon, and the other beasties had all returned to their rooms to rest. "Yes." Uncle Long nodded his head, pretending to be calm, but in fact, he couldn't calm down at all. Chapter 2037, Venting, 1, This was too easy. Uncle Long couldn't stay calm. If he did not know about Qingju's ability to enter a no-man's land, he would have thought that he was dreaming. However, just as the two of them were bewildered, an explosion suddenly sounded in their ears. Uncle Long and Ao Jie looked at each other and thought to themselves at the same time, the explosion just started? Yes. The great explosion in the Divine Lord's residence had officially begun. Furthermore, Qingju had purposely aimed the light screen at every corner of the Divine Lord's residence so that Uncle Long and Ao Jie could watch this exciting scene better. The explosion was also deliberately let in by Qingju for them to hear. In the light curtain, smoke filled the air, and soon, the sound of explosions rang out. However, the explosions did not cause much damage to the buildings of the Divine Master's residence. At most, they only caused some cracks. However, the flowers and plants in the Divine Master's residence were greatly damaged. Most of them had become withered flowers and willows, lying lifelessly on the ground. Seeing this, Ao Jie could not help but say, "Aya, poor little flowers and grass. The place you grew up in is too bad, and now you've become the scapegoat of that old woman, Wu Yan." will you die if you say one less word? Hearing Aojie's words, Uncle Long rolled his eyes at Aojie. In fact, he did not feel sorry for those plants at all. Would there be anything good from the plants planted by women? Furthermore, Schwer had also said that those flowers and plants were poisonous. However, the effect of Schwer's explosive ball was quite good. He could already see the God Lord's estate in a mess again. It was even more chaotic than a few days ago. Just as Uncle Long had seen, the entire Divine Lord's estate had fallen into an unprecedented panic. The three supreme gods of the Divine Lord's estate Xian Yi, Xia Yi, and Huang Wei had appeared at the scene to direct the somewhat flustered people in the Divine Lord's estate. When the three of them saw the God Lord's estate that had been completely destroyed, they felt a headache coming on. In fact, it wasn't entirely true to say that the appearance was completely different, because the main building of the god's manor was not too seriously damaged. There were only some small cracks in some places. However, the originally magnificent god's manor was now completely black from the explosion. In the dark clouds and heavy rain, it looked even more desolate. Anyone who saw it would know that it had just been destroyed. What made the three of them even more frustrated was that while they were worrying about the construction of the God Lord's estate, explosions continued to ring out one after another. This fact made them extremely depressed. Your Excellency Xian Yi, you can't do this. We have to think of something. If this continues, the God Lord's estate will be destroyed. Huang Wei looked at Xian Yidao worriedly. In fact, he was more worried about the Divine Master's anger. Does Your Excellency Huang Wei have any good ideas? Xian Yi looked at Huang Wei without a change in expression and asked indifferently. At this time, he was expressionless, but in reality, his heart was already in turmoil. This was because he knew that the commotion these few days was caused by that girl. Although these disturbances would cause him to be badly battered, he could not help but admire that girl's courage and reckless actions. She even dared to mess with the people of the Divine Lord's estate and blow up the Divine Lord's estate. What else was there that she didn't dare to do? AI. We can only make a decision after seeing how much damage the God Lord's estate has suffered. When Huang Wei heard Xian Yi's words, he sighed helplessly. What good idea could he have? If he had a way, would he still ask Xian Yi? Yes. Huang Wei's words made Xian Yi and Xia Yi nod their heads at the same time. Then, the atmosphere between the three of them became heavy. However, although the three of them didn't say anything, they were all thinking about how to deal with this matter and how to prevent it from affecting them. However, they also knew that it was absolutely impossible to not take responsibility for such a big matter. It was just a matter of how much responsibility he had. At this moment, a guard came to report the casualties. The three of them were shocked when they heard this. Why are there casualties? After hearing the guard's words, Xian Yi hurriedly asked. As far as he knew, most of those explosive balls were in the corners, so no one should have been injured. When we were searching, an explosive ball happened to explode. Someone couldn't dodge in time, so he was injured by the explosion. The guard explained gloomily. Oh. Were they seriously injured? Did you take any healing pills? Xian Yi asked with concern. They've already eaten. However, their injuries haven't fully recovered yet. The guard reported. How did this happen? Xian Yi frowned. There's some substance in those exploding balls that can restrain the healing of wounds, so our healing pills have no effect on those injuries. The guard said honestly. Then what should we do? When Huang Wei heard this, he also started to worry. At this moment, he saw a guard supporting Huang Shou as they walked over. When he saw that Huang Shou's face was a bloody mess and his body was covered in wounds, he almost jumped out of his skin in shock. Fuck. The person who had been blown up like a ghost was Huang Shou. If he wasn't very familiar with Huang Shou, he wouldn't have been able to tell that the man who had been blown up into a humanoid shape was Huang Shou. However, this was too tragic. When he saw the grievance in Huang Shou's dim eyes, he really wanted to beat up this idiot. Idiot! Why didn't you hide when you knew there was danger? Why was he still charging forward? Huang Shou was his descendant, and a descendant he liked very much. Therefore, out of his love for Huang Shou, he did not expect Huang Shou to work hard in the Divine Master's estate or enjoy glory. As long as he could keep his life, it would be fine. But now, what had this guy done? Looking at the unfriendly eyes of his ancestor, Huang Shou felt wronged. He listened to his ancestor and hid when he was in danger. Unfortunately, he hid in the wrong place where the exploding ball was thrown. So, he was in a tragedy. Old ancestor, Huang Shou had just called out, but he swallowed the words he was about to say under Huang Wei's glare. Woo! He felt that he had been too pitiful recently. That ugly monster bullied him, and now the old ancestor was also blaming him. However, Huang Wei was not in the mood to care about his own junior. Instead, he ordered the guard who was supporting Huang Shou, "Why did you bring him here? Hurry up and take the injured back to their rooms to recuperate." In fact, he wanted to send Huang Shou back to recuperate, but he was afraid that it would give others a reason to accuse him, so he had to bring everyone. Yes. Yes, sir. The guard replied. Actually, he felt quite aggrieved because it was Exalt Huang who insisted on coming to see His Excellency Huang Wei. He couldn't just stop him from coming. He couldn't afford to offend her because she had a strong backing. However, it was wrong to come. He really felt that he was unlucky enough. Although he thought so in his heart, he still accepted his fate and helped Huang Shou, who was like a wronged little wife, back to his residence. Chapter 2038, Venting, 2. After they left, Xian Yi glanced at Huang Wei disapprovingly, hiding his resentment. Why are you so fierce to Huang Shou? He didn't want to get hurt. It is. I'll definitely report this to the Divine Master and reward him for his hard work. You should be proud of your descendant's achievement, shouldn't you? Xia Yi also echoed in agreement. Huang Wei didn't have much of an aversion to Xian Yi's words. However, Xia Yi's words made him feel as if he was being mocked. His heart felt uncomfortable as if it was being pricked by needles. When Xian Yi saw Huang Wei's expression, he knew that this guy was at odds with Xia Yi again. Sigh. These two people. He wasn't young anymore, but why was he still acting like a child? So childish. Cough cough. After coughing a few times, Xian Yi, who was afraid that the two of them would fight, glanced at Huang Wei and said, Your Excellency Huang Wei, you should come with me to see the situation personally. Your Excellency Xia Yi will stay here and guard the place. After he finished speaking, he did not wait for the two of them to react and pulled Huang Wei away. However, even if he didn't leave in such a hurry, Huang Wei and Xia Yi wouldn't have too much of an opinion about his arrangements. After all, the relationship between the two of them was like fire and water. If they dragged Xian Yi into this and the three of them fell out, even the Divine Lord would have a headache. Therefore, Xian Yi had always been the target of the two of them. Unfortunately, Xian Yi was very slippery. No matter how they tried to please him, he had always maintained his neutral position. Although they were helpless about this, they also felt relieved. The two of them walked around the Divine Lord's estate, their hearts growing heavier. Although the main building of the God Lord's manor was not too damaged, the courtyard was so badly destroyed that it was unsightly. Seeing this, the two of them knew that the Divine Master would definitely be furious. Therefore, they turned around and called Xia Yi. The three of them then went to see the Divine Master. Who knew that when Fog Ice heard their report, she didn't say a word. Instantly, the three of them couldn't quite grasp what the God Lord was thinking. Even if you're angry, shouldn't you at least give a reaction? However, her current appearance made the three of them feel even more uneasy. Could this be the calm before the storm? In fact, how could Wu Xian not know the current situation of the Divine Lord's estate? However, even though she knew, she could not do anything about it. Moreover, when she discovered the abnormality, the God Lord's estate was almost destroyed. Therefore, she had no other way but to be angry. At this moment, although she didn't say a word, her heart was already in turmoil. The flames of anger in her heart had already burned into monstrous flames. However, the more furious she was, the calmer she appeared on the surface. However, her calmness on the surface made Xian Yi and the other two at a loss. Although they were reverent god-level experts and the Divine Master was usually respectful to them, they knew that they were always on the fiery mountain. The Divine Master's temper was unstable, and who knew when he would explode. Now, they could feel chills running down their spines just by standing in front of the Divine Master. After a long time. "I already know the situation," said Wu Cheng. "Comfort the injured and find someone to repair the damaged parts of the Divine Master's estate. I want to see the Divine Master's estate restored to its original state within 3 days." "Yes. Yes," the three of them replied. Then, they turned around and left. As they left, the three of them let out a long sigh of relief. They had finally passed this stage. The Divine Master would probably not take it out on them. In fact, they were overthinking it. No matter how angry Wuhan was, she would not bear to vent her anger on the Reverend God-level expert. After all, the Reverend God-level expert was the symbol of the Divine Master's estate. If there was no Reverend God-level expert in the Divine Master's estate, she, as the Divine Master, would be despised by others. Therefore, the Reverend God-level expert was absolutely safe in front of her. However, even though the Reverend God was safe, it didn't mean that she wouldn't vent her anger on others. Thinking of this, the fog immediately disappeared. A white light flashed, and in the next second, Wu Jing appeared in a gray room. As she walked closer, the fog in the room automatically dispersed and the whole room appeared in front of her eyes. It was a prison cell. However, it was not an ordinary prison cell. This was because this prison cell was located in a certain space, and the prisoners locked up here were naturally the most important. There were dozens of stone pillars in this cell, and a person was tied to each stone pillar. There were both men and women, and most of them were unconscious. Their faces were pale, and their clothes were not covering their bodies. They were covered in wounds, old and new, and many of them were old injuries from the years of the formation. The person in charge of this prison cell was a black-clothed man. After seeing Wu Xiao, he quickly came forward and said with a flattering expression, "Master, how come you have time to come over today? I'm here to see if you've been slacking off." Wu Yan glanced at her subordinate and said indifferently, "Master, how could this servant dare to be lazy? This servant has always strictly followed Master's orders. Every day, I torture these people and drain their blood. I'll be careful and conscientious, and I won't dare to slack off in the slightest." The man in black said with a serious face. He hated that he couldn't take out his heart and liver to show Wu Jing to prove that what he said was true, because if he did, he would have to die. "You're done with today, yes?" she asked in a soft voice, but her face was expressionless, making the black-clothed man unable to guess what her master meant. "I just finished," the man in black said hurriedly. "Then let's do it again. I want to operate it myself," laughed Ripple Mist coldly. "Yes. I'll prepare the tools for Master," the black-clothed man immediately said after hearing Wu Xian's words. The prisoners who had heard their conversation glared at Wu Chen. Unfortunately, they could not speak because Wu Chen did not like to hear their voices. Therefore, they were all fed mute medicine. However, even if they could not speak, it could not stop them from expressing their anger. "Yo, staring at me again?" When Wu Yan saw the expressions of those people, she smiled charmingly. "Master, do you want to dig out all their eyes?" the man in black suggested. Although his strength was not high, his methods were too vicious. Otherwise, his master would not have let him manage these important prisoners. Here, he could display his strength. After all, he loved to torture people the most. Especially when no matter how he tortured her, he couldn't kill her. That was why he liked it even more. After all, torturing people was also a kind of realm. He believed that he had reached the peak of this realm, which was also something he was most proud of. "No need. I want to keep their eyes open and let them see how glorious I am, how I will laugh at the entire divine world. Ha ha ha. Ha 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 ha. Kiran laughed wildly. Seeing these people, her mood improved. However, her arrogant words only made those people's eyes even angrier, while Fog Ripple laughed even more happily when she saw this. Chapter 2039, Venting, 3. At this time, the black-clothed man had already prepared the tools for torture. The most common instruments of torture were whips and iron pincers. After the man in black brought the instruments of torture to Wu Chen ordered, "Wake the others up." Yes. After the black-robed man responded, he immediately fed the unconscious people a pill. That pill was only a primary-level healing pill. It could relieve some of their pain, but it was impossible to completely cure them. And it was by relying on these pills that had little effect that they had to endure the torture of darkness day after day, year after year. Originally, there were more than that number of people. However, over the years, many of them had fallen. They did not even have the chance to reincarnate because these devils would not let go of the souls of their companions. Those people had disappeared from this world forever. When the unconscious people woke up and saw the fog, they had the same expression as those who still had a trace of consciousness, which was anger. He was extremely angry. If they weren't being controlled, they would have swallowed the fog without hesitation. However, when she saw everyone's expression, her mood was surprisingly good. Wu Xian came to a tall and strong man. She reached out her hand and gently touched the man's injured body, but the man did not even look at her. Although the man's injuries were not light, one could still see his handsome figure. However, after suffering for so many years, his appearance now looked like an old man in his 60s or 70s, giving people the feeling that he was a candle in the wind. If it was not for his tall figure, straight posture, and sharp eyes, he would be an old man. Although he didn't even look at Wu Jing, the disdain in his eyes was unconcealed, and the cold air around him became more and more intense. When Ripple Mist saw this, she laughed. "Little Qing Yang, do you hate me?" I'm so sad." There was a charming smile on Wu Yan's face, but her tone was resentful. However, the man still did not have any reaction and did not look at her. "Do you want to know where your senior brother is? A while ago, he specially came to save you." Kiran was neither angry nor annoyed as she continued to speak with hidden bitterness. These words finally caused the man to have a slight reaction, but that reaction was only faint. However, at this time, the man named Qing Yang was already so excited that he could not control himself. "Senior brother. Senior brother is here. How is Xixiang now?" Although Qing Yang was very concerned about his senior brother's condition, he knew that he couldn't ask. Once he asked, he would have fallen into this vicious woman's trap. He would be led by the nose by this woman. So, although he was extremely excited, he didn't dare to show any abnormalities or reveal any clues. However, although Qing Yang's reaction wasn't big, Wu Yan was well aware that he was very concerned about that bastard's whereabouts. Qing Yang definitely couldn't hide this from her. Then, she continued, "Bing Yao is injured. And it's not a light injury. He was poisoned by my flower poison. Do you know what will happen to you? It won't be long before he becomes my most loyal slave. However, compared to him, I still feel more sorry for you. I didn't use any flower poison on you, nor did I make you my slaves. I'm fine." Wu Yan began to take credit. Hearing her words, Qing Yang really wanted to curse. "You're good, my ass. He didn't use the flower poison on us because he wanted to torture us and treat us as his mobile blood bank. He knew very well that once they were poisoned by the flower poison, unless they died, it would be impossible for Wu Chen to torture them in this way. Now, Wu Chen could do whatever he wanted." Wu Cheng's words made him worry about his senior brother. Although they had suffered all kinds of torture here, they had not lost their nature after all. If their senior brother really became Wuhan's slave as Wuhan had said, they were afraid that their senior brother would be in so much pain that he would wish he were dead. Although he doubted the authenticity of Wu Yan's words, he also knew that Wu Xian had no need to lie to a prisoner like him. Something must have really happened to his senior brother. Thinking of his senior brother, he then thought of his master, and his heart suddenly ached. Seeing Qin Yang, who had always been calm and composed, suddenly show an expression of pain, Ripple Mist was excited. Humph. She was still pretending to be unconcerned, but now she couldn't keep pretending anymore. However, she didn't want Qin Yang to continue ignoring her like this. So, after taking the whip from the man in black, she directly swung it at Qin Yang. With a pa sound, a deep bloody mark appeared on Qin Yang's body. But at this moment, Qin Yang seemed to not feel any pain as his entire body and mind were immersed in the past. He thought of his master, senior brother, and many other people and beasts. And all the happiness and beauty in the past had been destroyed by this greedy woman in front of him. He hated it. Seeing that Qin Yang was immersed in his own thoughts, Wu Xian whipped him a few more times. In an instant, Qin Yang's body was covered in wounds again, and bright red blood flowed down from the wounds. Wu Xian stretched out her jade-like fingers, touched the fresh blood, and put it into her mouth. The delectable taste of the blood caused her to close her eyes. The continuous pain in his body also woke Qin Yang up. Qin Yang felt like vomiting when he saw the fog sucking his blood and showing an excited look. This woman was too disgusting. At the same time, Qin Yang really vomited, and this scene caused the anger in Ripple Mist's heart to explode. The whips mercilessly whipped Qin Yang's body and very quickly, Qin Yang was beaten into a pulp. However, he still gritted his teeth and did not even frown because he was already used to such torture. It wasn't until Qin Yang fainted that Wu Xiao unwillingly threw away the whip in her hand. Seeing that Wu Xiao obviously hadn't had enough fun, the black-clothed man handed over a torch in a timely manner. You want me to burn him to death? I can't bear to. Qin Yang's temperament was somewhat similar to US, so she also had a special feeling for Qin Yang. Unfortunately, Qin Yang didn't know what was good for him. He would rather be tortured by her than stay by her side and become her exclusive property. Therefore, it could be said that she loved and hated Qin Yang. Of course not. Master, Qin Yang has fainted. This subordinate wants you to wake him up. The man in black laughed. He knew that his master had not had enough fun. Therefore, he would naturally do his best to provide the most perfect service to his master. The torch that he handed over was actually one of the many punishments. As long as the torch lit the stone pillar and burned it red, forget about fainting, even if it was dead, it would be roasted until it woke up. After Wu Jing understood the man in black's meaning, she returned the torch to him and said, I can do this to others, but I won't allow it to happen to him. You are also not allowed to use this punishment on him in the future. She still couldn't bear to see Qin Yang. Yes. The man in black replied fearfully. In fact, he could tell that his master was still reluctant to part with this pretty boy. However, this pretty boy did not appreciate his master's kindness, so his master had ordered them to punish him. Compared to the others, the punishment they gave Qin Yang was considered light. After thinking about this, the black-clothed man respectfully retreated to the side. As for Wu Xian, she took out a medicinal pill, opened Qin Yang's mouth, and fed it. Not long after, Qin Yang woke up. My heart ached when I saw you unconscious. The expression on her face was charming and charming. If it were any other man, they would have been mesmerized by her. Unfortunately, she had met Qin Yang. Qin Yang, who wanted to vomit whenever he saw her, would not even give her a good look, let alone fall in love with her. Moreover, he and Wu Yan had known each other for many years. This woman's character could not be hidden from him at all. Therefore, he despised Rime Ice from the bottom of his heart. When she saw that Qin Yang had only rolled his eyes at her, the anger in her heart burned even more fiercely. However, she did not want to torture Qin Yang anymore. She wanted Qin Yang to watch her torture others. With this thought in mind, Wu Chen immediately said to the black-robed man not far away, bring the torch over. Yes. After listening to Wu Xian's instructions, the man in black quickly brought a burning torch. The man in black, who thought that Wu Xian had changed her mind, saw with his own eyes that Wu Xian had set the stone pillar next to Qing Yang on fire. Suddenly, the man in black felt a chill in his heart. It seemed that he would have to be more merciful to Qing Yang in the future. The stone pillar next door that had been lit up quickly turned red, and hoarse roars of pain reached the ears of the people present. They were furious. However, even more people closed their eyes. They could not bear to see such a cruel scene. They had long been used to it. They were all cultivators. Although the torture was brutal, it only caused them superficial wounds, which were really nothing to them. The hoarse cry of pain lasted for a while before it disappeared. Everyone knew that the person had fainted from the pain. After doing all this, Wu Yan's anger was somewhat vented, but she was still not satisfied. Her beautiful eyes stared at the other people present. This time, she chose a woman. It was said that the opposite sex attracted each other, and the same sex repelled each other. There seemed to be an inextinguishable hatred between Wu Cheng and the woman. Even the way she looked at the woman was filled with hatred. However, when the woman saw Wu Xiao's expression, she smiled brightly. She really wanted to ask, "Do you hate me?" Chapter 2040, God Protecting Tower, 1. Seeing the woman's provocative gaze, the anger in her heart multiplied. Seeing her like this, the woman could not help but laugh. Ha ha ha. The woman laughed very proudly, and her scarred face looked even uglier because of her smile. Are you very happy? I don't know if you can still smile when you see your current appearance. Wu Yan suppressed the anger in her heart and said indifferently. When the woman heard her words, she didn't seem to care at all and laughed even more wildly. Yes. She had become ugly. Her face and body were covered in wounds, but so what? The person in her heart was no longer around. Even if she had a peerless face, who could she show it to? Therefore, she no longer cared about it. What she wanted to see the most now was what happened to Rhyme. She hoped that Rhyme would be even worse than her current state. Seeing that the woman only smiled, Wu Xiao continued, "You're still so happy even though you've become an ugly monster. I really don't know what you're thinking. Wu Chen, even if I'm an ugly monster, I'm still happier than you. At least, Master Yu won't hate me. Do you still have the face to see Master Yu?" Although they couldn't speak, in fact, they could still communicate through voice transmission. It was just that it would consume divine power. Therefore, in order to live longer and to see Wu Chen's fate one day, they tried their best to remain silent. However, at this moment, she couldn't bear it anymore. Don't mention him. Don't mention him. He was already dead. He had already disappeared from this world forever. You won't be able to see him anymore. I won't be able to see you anymore. The woman's words touched Wu Yan's sore spot, causing her to roar madly. In her heart, she could mention you and think of you, but she would not allow anyone to mention it in front of her. This woman had obviously violated her taboo. In the next second, the whips hit the woman's body as densely as raindrops. In an instant, the woman's blood splattered everywhere, and the fine pieces of flesh brought down by the barbs of the whips flew in the air. However, the woman gritted her teeth and resisted the urge to cry out. Her eyes were filled with deep hatred as she looked at Wu Jing. She knew that Wu Yan hated her because she was the only woman by Lord Ye's side other than Wu Yan. However, she was only Lord Ye's subordinate while Wu Yan was Lord Ye's sister in name. Therefore, in reality, she was also jealous of Wu Yan. She admitted that she had caused trouble for the Fog Ripple in the past, but she had never thought of taking the Fog Ripple's life. Now, she regretted it. If she had known that the Fog Ripple would betray Sir Yu, she would have ruthlessly gotten rid of this woman back then. Then, Sir Yu would not have fallen. What a pity. There was no medicine for regret in this world. She had already tasted the evil consequences of cutting the grass and not removing the roots, but it was too late to say anything now. At this moment, she hated herself. She hated it so much that she was already numb to the pain in her body. Gradually, the pain intensified, and she could not bear it anymore and fainted. However, she did not make a sound from beginning to end. Seeing that the woman had fainted, Fog Ripple directly took a torch and lit the stone pillar. After a while, the woman woke up from the pain. Then, a rain of whips hit her body. However, she had long been numb. How could the pain of the body compare to the pain of the heart? Don't you feel pain? Did it really not hurt? Call it out. Scream. Seeing that the woman was holding on, the anger in Fog Ripple's heart had no way to be vented. Her slightly better mood was now in a mess again. The whip she hit the woman's body became more and more powerful, but the woman still did not make a sound. Seeing this scene, the black-clothed man's back broke out in cold sweat. He knew that his master hated this woman, so every time he tortured this woman, he would be the most severe. But compared to his master, the black-clothed man felt that he was still too kind. Because in less than a quarter of an hour, the woman was already a bloody mess, and her human form could not be seen. If this continued, would that woman still be alive? The man in black was even more speechless when he heard his master making the woman scream. The people here had all been fed mute medicine, so it would be difficult for his master's wish to hear the woman's voice to come true. Even if these people screamed out in pain, it was not the normal ah-ah. It was an extremely unpleasant and hoarse voice. It was simply unbearable to the ears. Thinking of this, the man in black suppressed the fear in his heart and reminded, "Master, they've all been fed medicine. They can't make any pleasant sounds." The man in black spoke with great hidden meaning, and his eyes were full of respect as he looked at Wu Chen. However, in fact, his heart had been trembling the whole time because the man in front of him was too temperamental. "Oh, I forgot about that. How about this? Give them the antidote immediately. I want to hear them scream in pain." Wu Xian thought for a moment and ordered. "Yes." The man in black hurriedly responded, but he couldn't help but feel disgusted in his heart. It was really difficult to serve such a master. She was also the one who didn't want them to make a sound because of the noise. She was also the one who wanted to hear them scream in pain. She was really not ordinary. However, he could only think about these things in his heart. He definitely didn't dare to say it out loud. Otherwise, he would be the one who would lose his life. After the men in black fed the prisoners the antidote one by one, the curses in the prison cell continued. When Ripple heard these curses, she actually laughed very happily. When the men in black saw this, they couldn't help but feel disgusted. What a pervert! Bitch! You still have the face to laugh. Hearing Wu Xiao's wild laughter, the imprisoned people became even angrier and cursed even more harshly. "What are you talking to a slut about?" one of the men said weakly. "Yup. Talking to her would only dirty our mouths, so we ignored her and only scolded her." "Ha ha ha. Bitch. Ungrateful wolf. We won't let you off even if we die." For a moment, voices filled with hatred sounded in the cell. However, Wu Yan didn't care at all. The fiercer these people scolded, the happier she was. At least, she had achieved her goal. However, those people only cursed for a while before all of them shut their mouths and refused to say another word. Seeing this, Wu Jing couldn't help but roar, "Curse! You guys can continue scolding." Only when she heard them scolding her would she feel that she was valued. Therefore, she had to admit that she was indeed a little perverted. "Scolding you will dirty our mouths," someone said with a look of disdain. Just now, they were just venting. Now that they had scolded enough, they naturally wouldn't let Wu Chen, who obviously hadn't heard enough of their scolding, get what she wanted. "Weren't you guys having a good time cursing just now? Continue scolding. Come. Continue scolding. I'll kill anyone who doesn't." Ripple Mist glared at him with her beautiful eyes. "You want to hear me scold you?" "I'm sorry, we don't have time to scold you," someone else said. "Then you can all go to hell." Wu Yan's anger burned. Immediately, 2 tentacles as thick as a baby's arm reached out to 2 of them and deeply stabbed into their bodies. In an instant, the 2 of them immediately shriveled up and became dry corpses. The 2 of them had also died. When everyone saw this scene, they knew that even their souls had been absorbed by the fog. This scene was not unfamiliar to them. So, they only looked at the 2 of them miserably before they turned their heads and closed their eyes. Chapter 2041, God Protecting Tower, 2, they had already made up their minds to die. Feeling the determination in their hearts, Wu Cheng was depressed. Because she found that she seemed to have overreached herself. Killing 2 people was just to kill the chicken to warn the monkeys. However, these monkeys were obviously not afraid of death. Therefore, not only did her scare not have any good effect, but it also made them more determined to die. However, how could Fog bear to let them die? She knew better than anyone that it would be the best for her if these people were alive. This was because these people were her inexhaustible source of energy, and the strength of these people was also what she coveted. Therefore, they could not die. Thinking of this, Wu Jing called over the man in black and ordered, "Look after these people. The rest of them are not allowed to die." "Yes." The man in black hurriedly replied carefully. He did not want to become his master's fertilizer, so naturally, whatever his master said, he would firmly and strictly follow. After giving her instructions, Wu Yan was ready to leave. She had just absorbed some nutrients, so she had to go back and cultivate in seclusion to properly digest them. Although it had been a long time, the strength of those 2 people was still extraordinary. Therefore, it would probably take a few days to completely absorb their strength. At the same time, the fog disappeared. Seeing that Wu Xian had left, the man in black wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and heaved a long sigh of relief. Only then did he realize that his clothes had long been drenched. The next day, when Leng Ruoxue and the demon came out of the room, the explosion in the Divine Master's residence had almost ended. However, Leng Ruoxue would not let them stop just like that. Every time she saw them repairing a place, Leng Ruoxue would personally go over and place an explosive ball. Hence, the sound of explosions in the Divine Master's residence never stopped. The little beasts were having fun playing this game, but the people in the Divine Master's estate were all frowning and depressed. They didn't know which fearless god of plague the Divine Master's estate had provoked. He had actually come to the Divine Lord's estate again and again to cause trouble. What was even more infuriating was that they couldn't catch him at all. Just like that, the Divine Master's estate was filled with dark clouds. Everyone's faces were as black as if their own father had died. As the 3 reverent god-level experts, they felt an unprecedented pressure, especially Huang Wei and Xia Yi. The 2 of them had gone from being incompatible like fire and water to being partners with a smile. This showed the impact of this incident on the people of the Divine Master's estate. Xian Yi, who knew the truth, could only sigh with them every day with a sad face. He didn't dare to show any difference, but in fact, he admired that little girl more and more. That girl was really bold, even he couldn't help but be surprised. However, knowing that the Divine Master was in seclusion for the time being, Xian Yi thought of a way to secretly inform Leng Ruoxue and the others about this. When Leng Ruoxue and the rest heard this, they did not take action immediately. They were afraid that Wu Xian was deliberately mystifying the situation to lure the snake out so that they would walk right into the trap. In the bracelet, Leng Ruoxue and the rest were sitting in the garden, casually chatting. "Girl, Wu Yan is in closed-door cultivation. This is a good opportunity for us," Uncle Long said after some thought. "I know that too. However, why would Wu Xian go into seclusion at this time? Now that the God Lord's estate is in such a mess, isn't it suspicious that she's in closed-door cultivation?" Leng Ruoxue asked worriedly. "It's a little suspicious, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. Regardless of whether the news of Fog Ripple's seclusion is suspicious or not, I think we should go and try," Uncle Long suggested. The reason why he said this was because of Green Vessel. Otherwise, he would not have dared to take such a risk. "All right then." Leng Ruoxue glanced at the evildoer before nodding. She had wanted to observe for a few more days, but since Uncle Long wanted to make a move, they would go and take a look. At that time, it would be clear at a glance whether Wuhan was really in seclusion or trying to lure them out. Sister, I don't recommend going to that secret room now. At this time, Qingju, who had been listening on the side, suddenly spoke. He knew that his sister and the others wanted to take advantage of the fog to enter the secret room. However, let's not talk about whether it was true or not. He felt that this matter was not that simple. Because based on his understanding of Fog did not seem like someone who would enter seclusion at this time. With Fog's character, she should be furious at this time and should be venting her anger on the unlucky guy. Qingju understood rhyme very well. She had looked for someone to vent her anger on. However, because she had absorbed the energy of two people, she had no choice but to go into seclusion to digest it. However, Lin Ruoxue and the rest did not know about this. What they didn't know was that after Wu Yan absorbed the energy from the two people, there was a deviation in her digestion. A small accident happened because she was poisoned. This fact made Ripple Mist extremely angry. She thought that she was the ancestor of poison and there was nothing more poisonous than her in this world. However, she was poisoned while absorbing someone else's energy. This result was simply unacceptable to her. What was even more troublesome was that the poison had been running around in her body and showed signs of assimilating her blood. This discovery made her a little afraid. After all, the blood in her body was extremely important to her. It could be considered the source of all her power. She had gone through a lot of trouble to purify her blood to its current purity. How could she allow those dirty things to taint her blood? Therefore, for the past few days, she had been fighting against the strange poison. Of course, Lin Ruoxue and the rest were not aware of her current situation. Otherwise, they would not have let go of such a good opportunity. When Lin Ruoxue heard Qingju's words, she smiled and asked, Qingju, do you have any good ideas? Sister, I want to build the God-protecting pagoda first. Qingju said bluntly. God-protecting pagoda? What is that place? This was the first time Lin Ruoxue had heard of this term. However, it was obvious that Uncle Long and Ao Jia had heard of this place before. After hearing what Qingju had to say, both of their faces turned solemn. The God-protecting pagoda is a pagoda that protects the safety of the divine world. Like me, it's an innate divine weapon born in the chaos. However, the God-protecting pagoda has no owner. Therefore, I would like sister to build the God-protecting pagoda first. I hope that the God-protecting pagoda will recognize sister as its master. Qingju stated his purpose and then looked at Lin Ruoxue with a hopeful expression. When Uncle Long and Ao Jia heard what Qingju said, they could not help but gasp. They thought to themselves, this little fellow is so ambitious. Everyone in the divine world knew that the God-protecting pagoda was an innate divine weapon. The previous divine lord, Lord Yu, had also said that the God-protecting pagoda would only belong to those who were fated to obtain it. Therefore, there were countless gods who went to the God-protecting pagoda every day to try and see if it could recognize an owner. Unfortunately, after tens of millions of years, the God-protecting pagoda still remained ownerless. Chapter 2042, God-protecting Tower. 3. Sister, the God-protecting pagoda should belong to you, but that fellow is too arrogant. It's extremely difficult to obtain his approval, but he's very useful. That's why I want you to give it a try now. If he can recognize you as his master, it'll be relatively easier for us to find the petals of the miasma mist. Qingju explained. In fact, the God-protecting pagoda was the same as the universal bracelet. They were both naturally owned by the Divine Master. In this way, the Divine Master could better manage the divine world. Unfortunately, the God-protecting pagoda spirit was a very difficult guy. Although he could listen to the Divine Master's orders, he had no intention of recognizing a master. This was because he had said that he wanted to find a master he liked. As for the laws of heaven and earth, he had never paid attention to them. From this, it could be seen how willful he was. It was because he had never thought about how much trouble his master would bring to the divine realm if he was not the master of the divine realm. It would be fine if the other party did not have any ambitions. However, if the other party had ambitions, then the divine realm would be in great chaos. However, he had never thought about these things because he knew in his heart that protecting the divine realm was his natural responsibility. Even the laws of the heaven and earth would not dare to punish him for not recognizing him as a master. Thus, he was fearless. With his personality, Yu, who was relatively gentle, wouldn't care about him at all. However, Wu Yan had a lot of headaches because of him. After listening to Qing Ju's detailed explanation of the God's Guardian Tower, Leng Ruoxue felt a little conflicted. Even though she was interested in the God's Guardian Tower, she was not sure if it would recognize her as its master. If she were to draw water from a wicker basket and delay her from saving her senior brother, it would not be worth it. Qing Ju understood Leng Ruoxue's thoughts, so he continued to persuade her, "Sister, the spirit of the God-protecting tower has never played by the rules, so I'm not sure what kind of difficult questions he'll give you. However, you don't have to worry about one thing. After entering the God-protecting tower, time will stop, so it won't take much time. Originally, I was planning to wait until you're stronger before going there to try, but now it seems that it's better to go first. If you can really obtain his approval, it'll definitely be a great help for us, and it'll be easier to find the petals of the miasma. If he recognizes me as his master, can he really help me find the flower petals of Ramice?" Leng Ruoxue confirmed, half believing and half doubting. "I can't say for sure that he can help us, but no one can compare to him in terms of understanding of the divine realm. Moreover, he's not sealed and is still in his prime. So, he's the most suitable person to help us," Qing Ju promised. Actually, he had thought about it for a few days before he decided to let his sister obtain the recognition of the God Pagoda. Although the timing was not right, he could only do this for his sister's safety. "Shuai, why don't you go and try?" After hearing Qing Ju's words, Uncle Long also advised. In reality, as a divine beast that had lived for a long time in the divine world, he knew very well how difficult it was to deal with the God-protecting tower spirit and how annoying it was. However, there was no doubt about that fellow's strength. However, if Shuai went now, she would probably be looked down upon by the tower spirit. Therefore, he was a little worried that Shuai would not be able to withstand the tower spirit's humiliation. This was also the main reason for his hesitation. However, after thinking about it, he felt that it would be best to give it a try. Being scolded wouldn't hurt her anyway, and once Shuai was acknowledged by the tower spirit, it would definitely be a great thing for her. "Are you serious, old whale? Don't you know how vicious the tower spirit's mouth is? How dare you let the little girl go?" Aogie's eyes widened in disbelief when he heard what Uncle Dragon said. "It doesn't matter if I try, it's not like I'll lose a piece of meat. Moreover, as a person from the divine realm, who wouldn't want to become the master of the God-protecting pagoda? Therefore, if we don't seize the time to try it now, we won't have the chance to do so after the God-protecting tower has found an owner," Uncle Long said matter-of-factly. But, Aogia was about to retort when he was interrupted by Uncle Long. "No buts, go and try." Uncle Dragon glared at Aogia, forcing him to swallow his words. In fact, he wanted to say that Shuai would definitely be scolded if she went because anyone who was not a divine emperor would be ruthlessly humiliated by the tower spirit. Although divine emperors would also be scolded, the scolding would be relatively light. The only ones who would not be scolded would probably be hierarch experts. However, this was not absolute. He had personally seen a hierarch being scolded by the tower spirit in public. In the end, that hierarch had never appeared in the divine world. "Then I'll go and try." Seeing that Uncle Long had agreed, Leng Ruoxue could only agree. On the other hand, Green Vessel was a man of action. The moment Leng Ruoxue made her decision, he immediately brought them away from the unlucky divine master's residence and headed to the God Guardian Tower. The location of the God-protecting tower was also within the imperial city. However, the god-protecting tower was a guy that guarded the territory, and no creatures were allowed to live in his territory. Therefore, back then, you had to give half of the imperial city to the god-protecting tower. However, his location was relatively remote, and this was also what he had requested. When they were still some distance away from the God Protection Pagoda, Qing Ju took advantage of the fact that no one was around to teleport Leng Ruoxue and the other three out of the bangle. Then, Uncle Long brought them to the foot of the God Protection Pagoda. The God Protecting Pagoda was located on the mountainside of a mountain in the outskirts of Imperial City. When they arrived at the God Protecting Pagoda, Leng Ruoxue realized that there was no one else around other than the four of them. Even though it was a little strange, she could not help but exclaim in surprise as she looked at the God-protecting pagoda that towered into the clouds and could not even see the tip of the pagoda. This God-protecting pagoda is so tall. It's so magnificent. Of course. I'm the #1 pagoda in the divine realm. Right at this moment, a rather cocky voice entered Leng Ruoxue's ears. When she heard it, she could not help but frown. It seemed like the spirit of the God-protecting pagoda was just like what the demon had said, it liked to listen to pleasant words. But immediately after, she heard the owner of the voice curse, "You idiot, trash. How can you get such a simple question wrong? What's the point of living? Don't your parents regret giving birth to you? If I were you, I would have killed myself. Hurry up and buy a piece of tofu." Hearing this scolding, Leng Ruoxue's face darkened even more. However, she knew that the spirit of the God-protecting pagoda was definitely not scolding her. She just did not know who was so unlucky to be scolded so badly. But very quickly, she saw a middle-aged man roll out from the two tightly shut doors of the tall God Guard Tower. That's right, that person had rolled out. Furthermore, he had rolled past Leng Ruoxue's feet and had rolled down the mountain. Seeing this, Leng Ruoxue couldn't help but admire the wondrous idea of the God-protecting pagoda. Needless to say, this was definitely the work of the God-protecting pagoda's spirit. However, she didn't know what to say at this moment. "Beauty. Are you also here to gain my approval?" Before Leng Ruoxue could think of a way to speak, the spirit of the God-protecting pagoda spoke first. "Ah. Yes, I am." Leng Ruoxue nodded and automatically ignored the word beauty. Actually, she wanted to say that she was a man. At least for now. However, she didn't know if the tower spirit had the ability to see her real body. After thinking about it, she decided not to be calculative about her gender. Then quickly come in. As soon as the spirit of the God Protection Tower finished speaking, Leng Ruoxue and the others felt as if they were being pulled into the tower by a strong force. Furthermore, this force was something that they could not resist. It was only after entering the pagoda that Leng Ruoxue realized that the pagoda was filled with people. However, all of them were currently in a daze. Without exception, all of them were immersed in their own thoughts and did not notice that an outsider had arrived beside them. The God Protection Tower spirit's curses continued to ring out, causing Leng Ruoxue to facepalm. This fellow really didn't give her any face at all. Even she couldn't bear to listen to it anymore. However, it was a good thing that she wasn't being scolded at this moment. "Little girl, they should be in the middle of a trial," Uncle Long whispered to Leng Ruoxue after looking at the situation of the people present. "Oh." Leng Ruoxue nodded as her beautiful eyes swept across the people around her. These people's trials should be carried out in their divine souls. She didn't know if they would be injured, because once their divine souls were injured, it would be extremely difficult to recover. Hee hee. Don't worry, beauty, their souls won't be injured. The God Protection Tower spirit's voice rang in Leng Ruoxue's ears once more. Leng Ruoxue was instantly shocked. She never thought that this fellow would actually know what she was thinking. Sensing Leng Ruoxue's thoughts, the spirit of the God Protection Tower smiled in a very wretched manner and said, "Ha ha ha. Beauty, none of your thoughts can hide from me, but don't be afraid. I won't tell anyone what you're thinking. I swear on my divine spark. How much is your divinity worth?" An extremely disdainful voice rang out. Following that, the white-robed Huan Chen appeared in the God-protecting tower. Chapter 2043, Song 1, A. It's you. I was wondering who dared to talk to me like that. The spirit of the God-protecting tower seemed to be talking to itself. Furthermore, it was actually not angry. Leng Ruoxu's heart skipped a beat when she saw Huan Chen suddenly appear. She thought to herself, why is this fellow here again? She was helpless against illusionary Dust's lack of control and her inability to play by the rules. After all, she had always been very tolerant of her beastie. Seeing Huan Chen's behavior, she could only classify him as a beastie. In any case, he definitely couldn't be considered human. Little master, I'm not beastie. Sensing Leng Ruoxu's inner thoughts, Huan Chen hurriedly said. However, he immediately felt a pair of eyes as cold as ice flying towards his back. Instantly, his heart started beating wildly. Woo! He had forgotten that this evil man had said that he was not allowed to read Little Master's heart. Sometimes, he would read her heart in secret. This time, he had accidentally said it out loud and was caught red-handed by this evil man. Wouldn't he be dead for sure? At the thought of this, he could not help but move closer to Leng Ruoxu's side to seek protection. This evildoer should have some reservations when he was by Little Master's side, right? Huan Chen couldn't help but think to himself. In fact, he was too afraid of this monster. Other than looking at him coldly, he didn't want to do anything to him at all. At least, he didn't want to deal with him now. When Leng Ruoxu saw Huan Chen's frightened expression, she could not help but laugh in her heart. She even forgot what she wanted to say. In the end, it was Huan Chen who reminded her softly, Little Master, I'm not beastie. Leng Ruoxu finally remembered. It doesn't matter. I'll treat you like a beastie in the future. After hearing this, Huan Chen furrowed his brows, looking as if he had been wronged. Furthermore, just as he was about to rebut, he was interrupted by a certain inharmonious voice. Ha ha ha. Huan Chen, I didn't expect you to have such a day. Raise it like a beast. Beauty, I like this suggestion. The Guardian Tower's spirit laughed exaggeratedly. Even though Leng Ruoxu and the others did not see the person, they could tell from the voice that the owner of the voice was extremely happy. However, they did not expect Huan Chen and the Guardian Tower's spirit to know each other. However, after thinking about it carefully, these two fellows had a very close relationship with Master Yu, so it seemed normal for the two to be familiar with each other. It's good that you like it. Leng Ruoxu glanced at the furious Huan Chen and said speechlessly. It seemed like the spirit of the God Protection Tower and Huan Chen had similar attributes. They both did not play by the rules. Just as Leng Ruoxu finished her sentence, Huan Chen's furious voice rang out, You damn tower spirit, come out if you have the guts. Let's fight one-on-one. Tisk. You want to fight me one-on-one, so let's fight one-on-one. I'm busy, I don't have time to talk to you. You can go play in the mud by yourself. Good boy. Little Huan Chen beastie. The God-protecting tower's spirit was so angry that it could kill. Humph. You're afraid, aren't you? You coward. Disloyal bastard. Hurry up and come out, I want to take revenge for my old master. If I don't beat you to the ground today, I'll take your surname. Huan Chen continued to provoke her. Her originally fair face was now flushed with excitement, and it gradually deepened. Hearing the conversation between the two, cold sweat broke out on Leng Ruoxu and the rest's foreheads. What was going on? Why did these two guys start hurling abuse at each other? Leng Ruoxu, who was supposed to be scolded, had no choice but to watch the show. Uncle Long and Ao Jia, who had some understanding of the tower spirit, looked at Leng Ruoxu with envy and jealousy. This girl's luck was a little too good, wasn't it? The tower spirit had never scolded her since she entered. Was it possible that the tower spirit was also a lecherous person? Valuing girls over boys? But that's not right. There were also many women who had come to undergo the master recognition trial, and as far as they knew, many of them had been scolded to tears by the tower spirit. Therefore, they could not figure it out. In reality, if there were any other cultivators who were clear-headed right now, they would definitely be like Uncle Long and Ao Jie. They would be extremely envious and jealous of Leng Ruoxue. Because every single one of them had been cursed at, and some had even been scolded from the beginning to the end. In short, the attitude of the tower spirit towards them was very bad. If things didn't go well, it would curse them to death, and some might even punch and kick them. The tower spirit said that this was a test for them. And once the word test was mentioned, no matter how angry the other party was, they would have to be as obedient as a little white rabbit and let the spirit of the God-protecting tower do whatever it wanted. However, Leng Ruoxue wasn't aware of all this. If she knew, she would definitely think that the tower spirit was using the name of a test to deal with someone she didn't like. But in reality, she was right. The tower spirit did have this intention. You damned old ghost. Disloyal bastard. Hurry up and get out here. Let's have a one-on-one fight. At this moment, Huan Chen, who had been cursing non-stop, saw that the spirit of the God Protection Tower had suddenly stopped responding, so he continued to provoke it. But the God Protecting Tower spirit still didn't respond. Seeing this, Huan Chen became depressed and cursed even harder. Leng Ruoxue could not help but facepalm as she looked at Huan Chen roaring like a lion. This kind of Huan Chen destroyed his image of a banished immortal in her heart. How could Huan Chen be like this? At this moment, she couldn't say what she was feeling in her heart. In short, it was a complicated feeling. Huan Chen, who had obviously peeked into Leng Ruoxue's thoughts, saw that his little master was a little depressed. He quickly consoled her, "Little master. Calm down. This guy really deserved a scolding. He won't come out if I don't scold him." Oh. Leng Ruoxue didn't know what to say and could only reply with a soft "oh." Then, the voice of the God-protecting tower spirit rang out as Huan Chen had wished, "You're the one who needs a scolding. I told you, I'm busy. I don't have time for you. Tisk. Busy, my ass. Do you think I don't know you?" Huan Chen cursed again. After he finished speaking, he even stole an apologetic glance at Leng Ruoxue. Seeing that Leng Ruoxue's reaction wasn't too big, he was relieved. "What do you know about me? You only know how to sleep, you pig," the guardian spirit said with slight disdain. Ugh. The more these two guys scolded, the more angry they became. It was obvious that Uncle Long and Ao Jie couldn't take it anymore. Uncle Long had no choice but to remind them, "That dream dust. Your master is here for the master recognition trial." Although Uncle Long was just reminding him, the meaning behind his words was very clear. Your master is here for the master recognition trial, but you're the one who started the fight with the master here. It's not good for your master. Master recognition trial? Find this guy. Is there a mistake? This fellow is very perverted. How could he be worthy of my perfect and lovely master? Master. Let's return. This guy isn't good, he's not suitable for you. As expected, Huan Chen immediately stomped his feet when he heard Uncle Long's words. Then, he advised Leng Ruoxue earnestly not to go through the master recognition trial. However, before Leng Ruoxue could react, the spirit of the God-protecting tower heard Huan Chen's words and immediately interrupted, "You're the wretched one, you're the bad one. I'm an innate divine weapon born from chaos. It's a great honor to be my master." Chapter 2044, Sung, 2. The guardian tower spirit's words were very arrogant, but Huan Chen kept shaking his head. He sighed and said, "So what? You don't know how to recognize a master. So, it's better not to talk about such trivial things. We won't disturb you any longer. You can slowly choose your master." After saying that, Huan Chen turned to Leng Ruoxue and said, "Little master. If you have me, you won't be able to use the guardian tower spirit. So, let's not waste any more time here and go back." Alright then. Even though Leng Ruoxue did not know why Huan Chen would say that, she still played along. When Uncle Long and Ao Jia heard what Ling Ruoxue said, they could not help but widen their eyes and asked, "Are we just going to leave like this?" Uncle Long, Uncle Ao, let's go back. Ling Ruoxue nodded with a smile. After saying that, the five of them turned around to leave. However, they had only taken 2 steps when a furious voice rang in their ears, "All of you stop. If you want to leave without going through the master recognition trial, no way." "Ah. Are you planning to force me to buy it?" Ling Ruoxue was speechless. "Why not? Since you're here, you must undergo the master recognition trial. Moreover, you can only leave when I tell you to. You want to run away by yourself? In your dreams." The Guardian Tower spirit roared in an extremely overbearing manner. Hearing this, Ling Ruoxue couldn't help but be rendered speechless. This fellow was truly overbearing beyond normal. Couldn't he just take a stroll and witness the height and magnificence of the god-protecting pagoda? Hee hee. A beauty. I won't allow you to run away. Since you're here, you can only complete the master recognition trial. Otherwise, I'll never let you leave. Good girl. I will be gentler to you than to anyone else. Trust me. Sensing Ling Ruoxue's thoughts, the spirit of the God Protection Tower's attitude immediately became gentler. It continued to coax her. All right then. Ling Ruoxue knew that she had no choice but to agree. The moment she agreed, she was immediately enveloped by a white light and disappeared from the sight of Evil Demon and the others. Where's Shuer? Seeing that Ling Ruoxue had disappeared, Ao Jia immediately started to worry. Little Master is going through the master recognition trial. Huan Chen laughed wretchedly. Then, he gave the evildoer a victorious look. The two of them had a tacit understanding. Ah. Why is her trial different from the others? Looking at the stunned crowd around him, Ao Jia asked in a daze. Of course it's different. These people are only that old fart's playthings. They don't have the qualifications to accept the true trial. Huan Chen said. I see. Ao Jia seemed to have understood. According to this, many people should have been fooled by the God-protecting tower spirit. At the same time, he was also somewhat glad that he was not a human and could not make the guardian tower spirit recognize him as its master. Otherwise, wouldn't he also become one of these humans? At the thought of this, Ao Jia could not help but turn his gaze to the evildoer and asked curiously, Shuer was taken to who knows where by that guy, aren't you worried at all? What's there to worry about? Shuer isn't a child anymore, the spirit of the God-protecting tower won't hurt her. The demon said calmly. The spirit of the God-protecting tower was born from the chaos. Although it was a divine weapon, it was of the same bloodline as him. Therefore, it would not harm Shuer who also had the chaotic body. Instead, it would be very close to her. However, that fellow was born with a bad temper and did not play by the rules, so he was not sure what kind of treatment Shuer would receive. However, it would definitely not be like these people. Otherwise, he would not have agreed to let Shuer participate in the master recognition trial. But he might be scolded. Ao Jia whispered worriedly. I won T. From the moment Shuer entered until now, have you seen the spirit of the God-protecting tower scold her? So, she won't be like these people. Don't worry. The demon laughed. Oh. That's true. Hearing the demon's words, Ao Jia was finally not so worried. However, he continued to ask, then what are we going to do now? Wait. After saying that, the demon found a place to sit down. Uncle Dragon and Huan Chen also found their own places to sit. At the same time, Ling Ruoxue, who had been taken away by the white light, found herself in an empty room after the white light disappeared. The room was foggy and she could not see her fingers in front of her. However, the spiritual energy in the room was rather dense. After taking a few deep breaths, it immediately gave her a refreshing feeling. Girl, this place is not bad, right? It's not worse than that stinky bracelet, right? A voice that sounded like it was asking for a beating appeared by Leng Ruoxu's ears. Ah! How do you know? Leng Ruoxue was a little surprised. The spirit of the god-protecting pagoda actually knew that the universal bracelet was on her. TSK. We're both from the primal chaos, so I sensed him the moment he came to the divine realm. I just ignored him. And that Si Huanchen, the fact that he's by your side means that you have an extraordinary relationship with that idiot you. With my intelligence, of course I can guess. The Guardian Tower spirit explained proudly. You're very smart. You is my master. Leng Ruoxue nodded. Then, she smiled and asked, may I know the name of the smart Guardian Tower spirit? Originally, I couldn't tea, but seeing as you also have the chaotic body, I can tell you that my name is Tsang. How was it? Isn't this name very grand? Isn't it better than Qing Ju and Huan Chen's names? The god-protecting pagoda's Ling Tsang became Tsundere as he spoke, and his tone was filled with anticipation. Not bad. Leng Ruoxue nodded. However, she did not admit that his name sounded better than Qing Ju and Huan Chen's. After all, Qing Ju and Huan Chen were on the same side, and she would not help outsiders. Then whose name is better? Tsang was obviously very insistent on this. Seeing that Leng Ruoxue didn't answer him directly, he could only ask again. They're all good. Left with no choice, Leng Ruoxue could only reply like this. However, Tsang was obviously not satisfied with this answer. He continued to speak in a slightly annoyed tone, no. You have to tell me whose name is better. Your names each have their own merits. You can't compare them like this. Wiping away the cold sweat on her forehead, Leng Ruoxue felt like she was about to go crazy. Why was this little fellow so insistent on this matter? It really put her in a difficult position. Girl, you're too dishonest. I'm angry. Tsang was still not satisfied with Leng Ruoxue's answer and replied directly. Ah. All right. You have a nice name. Leng Ruoxue gave in and said the answer that Tsang wanted to hear the most. However, after saying this, Leng Ruoxue felt a little vexed. Sob. Was she being threatened by evil forces? As expected, Azure was happy. He then said with extreme satisfaction, hee hee. Nyo finally told the truth, that's good. Come. Your mouth. Leng Ruoxue didn't know if she was being teased. But the answer was obviously yes. Leng Ruoxue didn't know how to react to Tsang's words and could only stand there in a daze. After a long while, she couldn't help but speak, Tsang. Can I start my master recognition trial? The faster she finished the trial, the faster she could leave this place and leave Tsang who dared to tease her. Chapter 2045, Tsang, 3, It's not the beginning, it's already over. Cold laughed evilly. From his tone, one could clearly hear a trace of pride. However, Leng Ruoxue was a little dumbfounded. She had not done anything yet. How did it end? When did the master recognition trial begin? Why didn't she know about this? That, Leng Ruoxue was about to clarify when she was interrupted by Tsang. Nyo. In fact, the question I asked you just now was my trial for you, hee hee. If you don't say that my name is nice in the end, then you've failed the trial. However, even if you fail the trial, I will not let you go. I will only increase the difficulty of your trial. When you satisfy me and pass the trial, I will. You understand. Tsang knew that Leng Ruoxue was full of questions, so he explained patiently. The meaning of his words was that he had taken a fancy to Leng Ruoxue, so he had to let her pass his trial. However, after hearing Tsang's explanation, Leng Ruoxue was still confused and mumbled, I don't understand. This trial of yours is too much of a joke. This time, she was really going crazy. Originally, she had thought of many ways to deal with it and had planned to deal with it at any time. However, who knew that Tsang actually told her that she had passed the trial? Hearing this, Leng Ruoxue really wanted to curse out loud. However, her good upbringing allowed her to hold it in. However, the gloominess in her heart seemed to deepen. What the hell was this? Moreover, according to what she heard, if she didn't pass the trial just now, she couldn't leave and had to continue the trial. Did she understand it correctly? Sung. Was he planning to cling on to her? At this moment, Leng Ruoxue did not know what to say. Was she considered to have a burst of character? The innate divine weapon that had not been able to recognize an owner for tens of millions of years had only met her once and asked a simple question like whose name sounded better. After getting a satisfactory answer, he had passed the trial. Leng Ruoxue felt as though she was still in a dream. It felt so unreal. She couldn't help but pinch her own arm. It was only after she felt the pain that she believed that everything she had just experienced was real. But even so, she still felt like she was in a dream. Hee hee. Nyo. That's because she likes you. You're the most pleasing woman I've seen in all these years. Although you're a man now, you'll change back one day. You also have the chaotic body, so you're qualified to be my master. From now on, you'll be my master, so you'll have to love me well. Sung, who could sense Leng Ruoxue's thoughts, continued to explain. Don't you think you're playing around? Leng Ruoxue could not help but ask. I don't think so. I think I'm being very cautious. Besides, for so many years, almost no one has caught my eye. Now that I've finally met one, of course I can't let him go. Sung's proud voice drifted into Leng Ruoxue's ears. Other than sighing, Leng Ruoxue was still sighing. My master isn't even worthy of your attention? The helpless Leng Ruoxue asked out of curiosity. How high was Sung's standard? She didn't even like her master, and this fact made her even more depressed. However, why did he take a fancy to her? She didn't think that she could compare to her master. Yes, he's a man. I don't like it. Besides, he's an idiot. I want a cute and smart girl to be my master. Sung said matter-of-factly, but what Leng Ruoxue didn't know was that Sung, who was hidden behind the thick fog, actually blushed when he said that. Yes. He was shy. However, when Leng Ruoxue heard Sung's words, she didn't know how to react. This was not the first time she had heard someone say that her master was an idiot. The evildoer had said the same thing before. In addition, Azure had said that he wanted to find a soft girl to be his master. She didn't know that the artifact's spirit had become so lecherous these days. Was she outdated? Seeing that Leng Ruoxue didn't respond for a long time, Sung became anxious and quickly asked, Girl, you don't like me? I'm very cute. You'll definitely fall in love with me when you see me. Ah. Is that so? Leng Ruoxue couldn't help but wipe away the cold sweat on her forehead. Her intuition told her that these words must not be heard by that evildoer. Otherwise, little Tsung, who she had never met before, would probably lose his life. Of course. Tsung was being cocky again, and he automatically ignored Leng Ruoxue's thoughts. Following that, Leng Ruoxue felt a weight in her arms and subconsciously reached out to hug it. The fluffy touch in her hands made her heart skip a beat and she almost let go of the thing in her hand. However, a familiar voice stopped her. Girl, it's me. Hearing this voice, Leng Ruoxue couldn't help but lower her head. Immediately, her beautiful eyes met a pair of dark, bright, and moist eyes. At this moment, those wet black eyes were looking at her shyly and timidly. The thing in her hand was a Snow White Totoro. That's right, the furry little thing in her hand was a Totoro. However, this Totoro was a few sizes bigger than the Totoro that Leng Ruoxue had seen in her previous life. It was also cuter. Its entire body was chubby, and it felt pretty good to the touch. Leng Ruoxue, who had never been able to reject cute little animals, couldn't help but stroke the Totoro's body a few times when she saw this super large Totoro. Following that, she saw the Snow White Totoro's body begin to glow with a faint pink. Was this the rhythm of being shy? Girl, I told you you would fall in love with me. I'm so cute, people rarely reject me unless they're not human. The moment the cute Totoro opened its mouth, its cocky personality was revealed. Leng Ruoxue had to admit that Tsang was cuter when he didn't speak. You're really Tsang? Leng Ruoxue, who was still worried, asked for confirmation. I'm sure. Tsang laughed. Then, he shifted into a more comfortable position in Leng Ruoxue's arms and sneaked up against Leng Ruoxue's tall mountain peak. He couldn't help but think in his heart, the embrace of a soft girl is still the most comfortable. It was soft. And it smells so good. Hee hee. It was really good. Of course, it couldn't let its wretched thoughts be known by its master, who it took so much effort to take a fancy to, especially the man beside its master. It had to be more vigilant. With this thought in mind, Tsang became serious again and obediently lay in Leng Ruoxue's arms. Are you really willing to recognize me as your master? Leng Ruoxue continued to ask. She still felt that this matter wasn't too real, and she had no way of convincing herself to believe it. Of course. Otherwise, why would I bring you here? You should know that this is not a place that just anyone can come. Actually, he was very clear in his heart that Huan Chen had intentionally provoked him so that he would acknowledge this lass as his master. Moreover, he had a very good impression of this soft little sister, Leng Ruoxue. Hence, he went with the flow. In short, everyone had a tacit understanding. Where is this place? After hearing Tsang's words, Leng Ruoxue's curiosity was piqued again. This is where I live, and it's also the control center of the God-protecting tower. However, unless I bring you here, you can't appear here as you please, even if you're my master. Azure laughed. However, as my master, you can ask me for anything if you want to come here. I can't refuse you. Tsang was afraid that Leng Ruoxue didn't understand, so he added. Oh. What's the benefit of coming here? Leng Ruoxue asked again. Even though she didn't expect that after becoming the master of the God Guardian Tower, she wouldn't be able to come here as she pleased, she wanted to know what was the difference if she came here or not. Nyo can practice here. The spiritual chi here is definitely much more than that stinky bracelet. Moreover, I have always been at my peak, and my control of time is also better than that stupid bracelet. In addition, I know the heaven-defying art very well, and I can better guide you. So, Nyo can practice here in the future. Azure said with a smile. Then, other than me, can my family and subordinates come in to cultivate? Leng Ruoxue asked after hearing Tsang's words. They can't come here, but I can arrange another place for them. The time flow will definitely be much faster than in the bracelet, which is also very beneficial for them. Cold Truth said. Oh. Leng Ruoxue acknowledged softly, feeling her head throb. If she was the only one who could come, the demon would definitely not agree. It seemed like she did not need to consider cultivating here. Sensing Leng Ruoxue's thoughts, Cold One gritted his teeth and hardened his heart. That guy can follow us in, but no one else can. I see. All right then. Leng Ruoxue wasn't satisfied, but she could tell that this was Tsang's biggest compromise. At this moment, Qing Ju's angry voice suddenly rang out in the empty room. Damn Tsang, you actually dared to steal my girl? Qing Ju was furious, and the consequences were very serious. In the past, his sister had been cultivating in the bracelet. He could sense her condition at any time. After the appearance of the illusion dust, he had already snatched his sister away once. Now, this damn Tsang wanted to snatch his sister away from him. He could endure it, but he could not. No matter how good his temper was, Qing Ju could not tolerate it anymore. Chapter 2046, Hurry up and get the mist ripple out. 1. When Tsang heard Qing Ju's angry roar, he didn't get angry. Instead, he laughed even more flirtatiously and said with an annoying face, so what if I steal your girl? Bite me. Leng Ruoxue fell silent upon hearing this. Qing Ju was so angry that he could not speak. He wanted to bite, but he could not. The more he thought about it, the angrier he got. In the end, he could only express his anger by roaring, Tsang. Just you wait, I'll teach you a lesson one day. I'll be waiting for you. However, if you can't defeat me, don't cry. Azure laughed evilly. Then, he changed his position in Leng Ruoxiu's arms and laughed non-stop. Leng Ruoxiu glanced at Song, who was laughing so hard that his stomach was shaking. She didn't know what to say. This Song had a very different personality. At this moment, in order to change the topic and resolve the conflict between the two little fellows, Leng Ruoxiu had no choice but to take the initiative and ask, Song, when do you plan to recognize me as your master? No rush. Girl, your current strength is too low. If you want to recognize me as your master, you must at least be a divine emperor. Otherwise, you will be injured. Azure said very seriously. My ass. If even the origin of chaos can acknowledge me as his sister, why can't you? Before Leng Ruoxiu could react, Qing Ju's disdainful voice was heard again. I said no, so no, why? You're not convinced. Hearing Green Vessel's words, Song didn't want to explain. Instead, he roared in a domineering manner. Yes, I'm not convinced. Song. Don't dawdle and quickly recognize him as your master. We still have important things to do. I don't have time to chat with you. Qing Ju urged. Song's personality was unpredictable and he didn't play according to the rules. Hence, he was afraid that Song would go back on his words. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so anxious to force Song to recognize him as his master. However, how could Song be so easily manipulated by others? Its small face turned serious and said in a non-negotiable tone, I can't recognize you as my master now. It's not the right time. Girl, I'll only recognize you as my master when you become a divine emperor. In fact, I'm already taking good care of you. If it were someone else, they must have the strength of a reverent god. Oh. Since that's the case, you can only recognize me as your master after I become a divine emperor. Leng Ruoxiu said indifferently. She didn't have much of an opinion about this. After all, she was only here to try it out. Furthermore, she believed that Azure must have its own reasons for not wanting to recognize her as its master. Hence, she didn't want to put it in a difficult position. MMH. Girl, I'm really doing this for your own good. The origin of chaos will acknowledge you because you have the chaotic body and it has a sense of intimacy with you. So, as long as you can withstand its energy, it will be able to accept you. But I'm different. My requirements are high. If you want me to acknowledge that you are qualified to be my master, you must meet my requirements. Although I have initially recognized you as my master, if you don't meet my high standards and strict requirements, I will not acknowledge you as my master. So, in order for me to recognize you as my master as soon as possible, I've decided to train you personally from today on. Prepare to take the challenge. Azure said with anticipation. Ah. Well, start training today. Leng Ruoxiu blinked her beautiful eyes as she confirmed. Yes. From today onwards, we have to make good use of our time. I also want to recognize you as my master as soon as possible. Azure was very anxious. If it wasn't for the fact that the master it had taken a fancy to was too weak, it would have directly acknowledged him as its master. But now, it could only work harder and try its best to cultivate its master into a good master that met its requirements. Not today. I still have other things to do. After Leng Ruoxiu confirmed it, she rejected him immediately. What could be more important than my training? Hearing this, Azure's eyes widened in disbelief. He had originally thought that his future master would be very satisfied with his arrangement, but who knew that this girl would actually say no? It was instantly enraged. If he didn't train now, when would it recognize him as its master? I have to save my senior brother first. I can't start training today, so I'm not sure when I can start your training. Leng Ruoxiu spoke the truth. There was a trace of apology on her beautiful face. She could feel Tsang's eagerness and hope for his master to become a dragon. Unfortunately, her priority now was to save her senior brother. Hence, she could only say sorry to Tsang. Your senior brother. What's wrong with him? Azure asked somewhat curiously. Nyo's senior brother should be Dummy Yes other disciple, right? Although it had heard of it, it had never seen it before, so it naturally did not pay attention to Nyo's so-called senior brother's situation. He's injured and needs the petals of the mist to detoxify, so, Len Ruoshua explained, but before she could finish her sentence, Tsang interrupted her. You're looking for the flower petals of rime ice? He was really looking for death. With your strength? You must be dreaming. Tsang Zhen said honestly. He was not optimistic about Len Ruoxua's goal, even if she had the help of that man. After all, this was the God world and not the Nether prison. Even if it's a dream, I have to find a way to get the petals of rime ice. I can't not save my senior brother, so I can't accept your training for the time being. Len Ruoxua said with determination. Do you know the difference in strength between you and that old woman? With your current strength, you're simply courting death. If that old woman finds you, you'll lose your little life. Moreover, your chaotic body is definitely a great tonic for her. No. I can't let you take this risk. Azure strongly opposed. The hair on its body stood on end. From this, it could be seen how excited it was. Then you should help big sister. With your help, it won't be difficult for elder sister to get the petals from the fog phoenix's body. At this moment, Qing Ju's voice rang out again, and he made a request in a self-righteous manner. No. I can't and can't help her. This is beyond her ability, so I can't allow her to do this. No. Cold rejected without even thinking. In reality, although it had chosen Len Ruoxua, it hoped that the master it had chosen would be someone who knew how to judge the situation and had self-awareness. She would not be someone who was too ambitious and would do as much as she could. If she knew that she could not do it, then such a person was not worthy of being its master. It hoped that its master was smart, calm, and knew how to endure. Only such a person could achieve great things. Hence, it had no intention of helping Len Ruoxua. When Len Ruoxua heard Tsang's words, she didn't show any dissatisfaction. In fact, she could understand Tsang's thoughts because this matter was too far-fetched for her current strength. However, she did not intend to fight with Wu Jing head-on. Therefore, she never thought that she did not have any chance at all. At the thought of this, Len Ruoxua calmly said, Tsang. I won't force you if you don't want to help me, but I hope you won't try to stop me. I must save my senior brother, so I can't participate in your training now. Please send me out of here. Chapter 2047, Hurry up and get the mist ripple out, too. Len Ruoxua's words were unusually calm, but when Tsang heard it, he started to think. This girl was the only master it had taken a fancy to in so many years. If something happened to her, it would definitely regret it. So, Tsang was at a loss. Should he help or not? In reality, it really hoped that this girl would be able to use her own strength to defeat Wu Chen. However, from the looks of it now, this was definitely not realistic. The difference in strength between the two of them was not just a little bit. Furthermore, this girl Len Ruoxua was extraordinarily stubborn. AI. What should it do? After thinking hard for a long time, Tsang finally made up his mind. Girl, I said I wouldn't help you, so I definitely want help. However, I can think of a way to hinder Wu Xiao for a while. At that time, whether you can get the petals from her body will depend on you. So, don't count on me. Tsang spoke bluntly. Although his words were a little unreasonable, Len Ruoxua was still happy to hear him say this. Because just now, Green Vessel had clearly told her that even if Tsang only came out to obstruct fog, their chances of winning were very high. At the thought of this, Len Ruoxua gently stroked Tsang's soft fur with gratitude and said, Tsang. Thank you. No need to thank me. Helping you is also to let you finish what you have to do as soon as possible, so that you can accept my training with peace of mind as soon as possible, but this doesn't mean that I will agree with your decision. It was better to do less things that were beyond his ability. Moreover, I want to tell you that even if you become my master, you shouldn't rely too much on me. Unless I think it's necessary, I won't help you easily. Most of the time, you still have to rely on yourself. I hope you can understand. When Sung said this, it was as if he had changed into a beast, rather cold and heartless. When Leng Ruoxue heard this, she only nodded her head indifferently and said, I understand. How could she not know that it was better to ask for help than to ask for help from others? However, when Green Vessel heard Sung's words, he was rather dissatisfied. So many years have passed, I didn't expect you to still be so cold-blooded. No wonder no one likes you. Tisk. As long as I like myself, I don't need others to like me. Moreover, haven't you heard of the saying a loving mother will spoil her son? We are artifact spirits, not nannies. If the master can't meet our requirements, then it's fine to not have such a master. So, I won't be like you, accommodating my master everywhere and obeying my master's words as imperial edicts. Therefore, the master that I acknowledge must be a dragon and phoenix among 10,000 people, girl. Don't let me down. Sung said with a serious expression. Although it was saying this for Green Vessel, its dark eyes were fixed on Leng Ruoxue. Its fluffy little face was filled with anticipation. I will work hard. Leng Ruoxue looked straight at Sung and said seriously. She knew that Sung and Green Vessel treated her differently. Green Vessel was taking care of her, while Sung was using the opposite method to spur her on. To put it bluntly, Sung wanted to become a dragon. Even though Green Vessel had the same thoughts, Green Vessel's methods were gentle, while Green Vessel's were rough and direct. Regardless of which method they used, they were both for her own good. Hee hee. Girl, I knew I didn't misjudge you. Sung was extremely satisfied with Leng Ruoxue's words. He found Leng Ruoxue more and more pleasing to the eye. Furthermore, he had also secretly decided that if Nyo was unable to obtain the petal of that old woman's main body, he would help her. After all, it didn't want this matter to always involve this girl's thoughts, but this was the only time. It definitely wouldn't do it again. Then send me away now. Leng Ruoxue asked anxiously. She was suddenly taken away by the white light, and she wondered if the evildoer and the others were worried. Hee hee. I've already stopped time, so the time outside won't change while you're here. Besides, to others, you've only disappeared for a short while, so it'll show you around the god-protecting pagoda before sending you off. Understanding Leng Ruoxue's thoughts, Azure smiled. In reality, it wanted to say, you can cultivate here for a while before you leave. It was a pity that it knew that Nyo had something on her mind and would not calm down to cultivate, even if the time outside did not flow. Hence, it could only settle for the second best option, which was to let Leng Ruoxue familiarize herself with the environment. Alright then. Sensing Sung's determination, Leng Ruoxue could only agree. After all, from her point of view, it wouldn't take long for them to visit this place. Girl, follow me. On Sung Dao, the moment he finished speaking, Leng Ruoxue was brought to a control room. Leng Ruoxue lifted her beautiful eyes and sized up the control room. This control room was about the size of a football field. The surrounding walls were crystal clear, and the material was similar to crystal. However, the decoration inside was very simple. In addition to a few wide light screens, there was only a chair placed in front of the light screen. At this moment, Sung had already jumped onto the chair from Leng Ruoxue's embrace. He even waved at Leng Ruoxue and said, Girl, quickly come over. From here, you can see those guys who are in the trial. Oh. When Leng Ruoxue heard this, she walked to Sung's side. Then, her beautiful eyes looked at the screen. The moment she took a look, her forehead was filled with black lines. At this time, the largest screen in the middle had been divided into tens of thousands of small screens, and the people in the light screens were having a quick-witted question and answer session. However, the clothes of the person in the light screen were already torn and tattered, and he looked quite embarrassed. Seeing this, Leng Ruoxue was a little suspicious. Were these people's real bodies or divine souls? Seeing the confusion on Leng Ruoxiu's face, Azure smiled and said, "These people are really too stupid. How could they get such a simple question wrong?" "Ah. Your trial for them is to let them answer questions?" Leng Ruoxiu could not help but ask. "Of course. However, if they answer incorrectly, they will be punished. They only have 100 chances, which means that there are 100 questions for them to answer. If they answer all 100 questions, they will be kicked out by me, hee. Azure said proudly. "Then are they in their divine soul state right now?" Leng Ruoxiu asked again. "Yes. However, in the God-protecting tower, even if it's a divine soul, their bodies can also feel it. And their current appearance is exactly their original appearance." Azure explained. Leng Ruoxiu understood the moment Sang explained it. Leng Ruoxiu was filled with deep sympathy for those who were undergoing the trials because she happened to hear a virtual voice asking from one of the screens, "What is 1 plus 1? After the man replied that it was equal to 2, he was beaten up by the virtual brawny man. That person was still being continuously scolded, "Idiot. You idiot." After the punishment, the virtual voice asked again, "The beast or the egg came first?" The man hesitated for a long time and did not dare to answer. Finally, in the countdown of the virtual voice, the man seemed to have made up his mind and said, "First beast." Chapter 2048, Hurry up and get the fog ripple out. 3. Following that person was beaten up again. The sound of people being scolded for being stupid could be heard continuously. When Leng Ruoxiu saw this, she felt a deep sense of powerlessness. Why was it that the more she heard about it, the more she felt that she had been to her previous life? This witty question and answer was clearly a brain teaser's. Moreover, many of these questions had been discussed for a long time, and it seemed that no one had given the perfect answer. So, after listening for a while, she could tell that this was not a trial. It was clearly Tsang who was bored and was pranking people. "Tsang. They don't need to go through the master recognition trial now, right?" Leng Ruoxiu couldn't stand it anymore and reminded him, "Sigh. These people were really too pitiful." She reckoned that no matter how they answered, they would probably be beaten up. "Yes, but the trial will still continue. After all, it's not the right time to reveal our relationship yet. Therefore, we can't lose these people yet." Cold said it so matter-of-factly that Leng Ruoxiu couldn't refute it. Furthermore, she also understood that Cold wasn't just bored. It was treating the people who came to the trial as toys. At the thought of this, she could only shift her gaze away, not looking at those guys who had made themselves so pitiful for the trial. Her beautiful eyes turned to the other light screens, which were displaying the scenery of the divine world. Upon seeing this, Leng Ruoxiu could not help but ask, "Can we see the entire divine realm through the light screen here?" "Of course." Azure said proudly. "Then can I take a look at the land of demons?" Leng Ruoxiu said after some thought. "No problem," he said. "Yes," Tsang replied. Then, one of the screens flashed and the full view of the land of demons appeared in front of Leng Ruoxiu. When Leng Ruoxiu saw her home and so many familiar faces, she was instantly excited. This time, her grandfather and the others didn't come with her to the imperial city. Now that she could see them through the screen, she was exceptionally happy. She missed them. "Girl, go out. The sooner you obtain the petals of the mist, the sooner you can go home." At this moment, Tsang noticed that Leng Ruoxiu's mood was a little agitated and reminded her. However, there was something that he didn't say. With the flower petals in his hands, the training that he arranged for his future master was about to begin. However, when Leng Ruoxiu heard Tsang's words, she didn't doubt him and nodded her head, "Send me out." Although she missed her grandfather and the rest, she knew what was most important right now. Following that, a white light flickered before Leng Ruoxiu's eyes. When she opened her eyes again, she had already returned to the side of the demon and the rest. Seeing Leng Ruoxiu's sudden appearance, Uncle Long and Ao Jie heaved a sigh of relief. Even though they had confidence in Leng Ruoxiu, they were still worried. "Shuer, how is it?" Aojia asked impatiently, is Shuer done with her trial? How could he be so fast? It couldn't be that he didn't go through the trial, right? After all, those who had taken part in the trial before Len Ruoxue had yet to finish their trials. And when he saw Len Ruoxue's unscathed appearance, he could not believe that this little girl's trial had ended. It's all right. Azure agreed to help us hold off Rhyme Phoenix for a while. At that time, we just have to think of a way to get the petals from Rhyme Phoenix's body. Len Ruoxue said directly. Azure is the name of the spirit of the god-protecting pagoda. Did he recognize you as his master? Uncle Long asked nervously. The moment he finished asking, Aojia immediately looked at Len Ruoxue nervously. Yes, it said that it's willing to recognize me as its master. However, it thinks that my current strength is too low and wants to train me. It will only recognize me as its master if I meet its requirements. Len Ruoxue explained with a smile. This artifact spirit really has a personality. Aojia could not help but click his tongue. But thinking about it, it made sense. It was an innate divine weapon. How could it recognize a master so easily? If that was the case, he would not have been picky for so many years. It's fine if he has a bit of character. An expert can't be without character. Moreover, with his help, we'll have a greater chance of obtaining the petal of the mist. After Uncle Long confirmed it, he couldn't contain his joy. This news was like the sound of nature to him. Shuer, that Azure will only help us to obstruct the rime ice, but he won't make a move, right? Aojia also confirmed. Yes. Len Ruoxue nodded. AI. It's such a pity. If he was willing to help, we would have 100% chance of getting the rime ice flower petals. Aojia's face was filled with regret. He knew very well how powerful the god-protecting tower spirit was. I'm afraid that guy's strength isn't below Master US, but unfortunately, he's not willing to help. Be content. This is already very good. Hearing Aojia's words, Uncle Long rolled his eyes. He didn't expect the spirit of the god-protecting tower to help them deal with rime ice. If he really wanted to, those things wouldn't have happened back then. Uncle Long is right. Tsang didn't want to help us at first, but now he's willing to help us delay rime ice and buy us some time. It's already not easy, said Len Ruoxue. Tsang had even helped her to confirm that Fog's true form was indeed hidden in the secret room that she had suspected. However, it was hidden by an array formation, so outsiders could not see it. Tsang had even told her how to break the array formation. For this, she was very grateful to Tsang. Although Tsang's goal was only to hope that she could receive training as soon as possible, there was no such thing as free help in this world, right? Since that's the case, let's not delay any further. We should quickly sneak back to the spiritual abode. Uncle Long suggested. Yes. Len Ruoxue nodded. Then, with a thought, she brought the few of them into the bangle. Following that, Green Vessel turned into dust just like how it had come, bringing them back to the Divine Master's residence. This back and forth only took a few hours, but the chaos in the God Lord's manor was still not over. The people in the God Lord's manor were still busy cleaning up the obviously dilapidated courtyard. At this moment, Len Ruoxue received Tsang's voice transmission, asking them to wait for him in the courtyard. After informing Green Vessel found a remote corner and landed. Then, everyone's eyes turned to the light screen. After about 2 hours, Tsang still had not appeared. Aojia could not help but feel anxious. Girl, when will Tsang come? Aojia really wanted to see the legendary and domineering Guardian Tower spirit. Unfortunately, he had waited for so long and did not even see a shadow. Soon. Azure said that he was delayed by something and told us to wait. Len Ruoxue replied helplessly. However, as soon as she finished speaking, everyone felt the light screen in front of them tremble. Then, they heard a domineering roar. Get the fog out here. Everyone was stunned and looked towards the source of the voice. They saw a petite, Snow White Totoro standing in the middle of the light screen. The voice they heard clearly didn't match this small figure. However, no one would look down on this small fellow because Uncle Dragon and Aogia had already understood that this should be the god-protecting tower, Ling Tsang. However, none of them had expected that Azure's appearance was actually that of a cute little beast. However, after spending so much time with Leng Ruoxue, they knew that one could not judge a book by its cover, be it human or beast. If he looked down on her just because she looked cute, he would definitely be in for a tragedy. It was obvious that the people in the Divine Master's estate were going to have a tragedy. At this moment, Tsang was standing in the middle of the screen in the courtyard of the Divine Master's estate. He was looking down at the people surrounding him with a domineering aura. He raised his little white meaty claws, revealing a shiny and sharp curved hook. Tsang repeated, "Quickly get Rhyme to come out for this lord." Hearing these words again, Leng Ruoxue and the rest were in a mess. They couldn't help but think to themselves, what a domineering Tsang. After hearing Tsang's words, the few of them turned to look at the demon simultaneously. Then, they thought to themselves that even the demon would not dare to say such words so openly. After all, his identity could not be exposed. If he appeared in the divine world as the master of the dark world, it would definitely cause panic in the divine world. But Tsang dared. In an instant, Tsang's image in Uncle Dragon and Aogia's hearts became much bigger. Look! This was what a true divine weapon was. It was so domineering and satisfying. Even though Uncle Dragon and Aogia wanted to shout for Fog Ripple to come out just like Tsang, they might not be a match for Fog Ripple even if they joined forces. Therefore, they could only think about it in their hearts. However, when they heard Yusho's words, they were definitely proud. In contrast to the excitement of Uncle Long and the others, the people in the God Lord's estate were completely stunned. With their mouths half open, many people were unable to come back to their senses for a long time. This sentence was too much of a shock to them, wasn't it? Who was that Fog Ice? The current Divine Master. But now, there was a cute little beast waving its sharp claws and shouting for the Master God to come out. Where did it get such courage from? Among the crowd, the three hierarchs with the highest status were the first to regain their senses. However, even after they had regained their senses, they were still in a daze. Although the little beast in front of them was not the only one in the divine realm, as far as they knew, the Totoro clan did not seem to have such courage. Then, did this Totoro take the wrong medicine? The three of them had the same thought, but before they had the chance to voice their doubts, Azure was getting impatient. Didn't you guys hear what I said? Hurry up and get the rippling mist out, or else don't blame me for raising the God Lord's estate to the ground.